You're fired. Two words that would shatter one man's world and crack open a billionaire's heart she never knew existed. On the 61st floor of Manhattan's most powerful tower, Victoria Hale was about to learn that some tests reveal more about the tester than the tested. When a widowed father's quiet plea for his daughter's dignity pierced through decades of cold ambition, everything changed. This is a story about power, redemption, and the courage to choose humanity over empire. If you're watching from anywhere in the world, drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. Hit that like button and stay until the end, because what happens next will change everything. The elevator doors whispered open on the 60th floor, with the kind of silence that only extreme wealth could buy. No cheerful ding, no grinding gears, just the hushed pneumatic sigh of German engineering and polished steel. Victoria Hale stepped out first, her Louboutins clicking against Italian marble like a metronome counting down someone's final moments. She didn't look back to see if Daniel Carter was following. People always followed. That was the natural order of her world. The private dining room sprawled before them, floor-to-ceiling windows framing Manhattan like a conquered kingdom, the city lights beginning to flicker on as dusk settled over the urban sprawl. The table could seat 20, but tonight only two places were set, facing each other across an expanse of white linen and crystal that cost more than most people's monthly rent. "Sit," Victoria said. Not quite a command, not quite an invitation. Daniel Carter hesitated in the doorway. At 34, he still carried himself with the ghost of who he used to be, a man who once dreamed bigger than survival, before the universe taught him that survival was the only dream that mattered. His server's uniform was impeccable despite the double shift he'd just finished. His hands, rough from years of manual labor, gripped the doorframe for just a moment before he forced them to his sides. "Miss Hale, I'm not sure what this is about," he said carefully. His voice carried the particular exhaustion of a man who'd learned to expect bad news dressed up as opportunity. Victoria settled into her chair with the fluid grace of someone who'd never questioned whether she belonged anywhere. "I said sit, Mr. Carter." He sat. For a long moment, she studied him across the table. This was her favorite part, the silence before revelation, when people's masks began to slip. She'd built an empire on reading these micro-expressions. The dart of eyes seeking escape routes, the unconscious lean away from confrontation, the defensive crossing of arms. But Daniel Carter just sat there, hands folded on the table, waiting. Not defiant, not obsequious, just present. It unsettled her more than she cared to admit. "Do you know why you're here?" Victoria asked, her fingers tracing the stem of her wine glass. The Bordeaux had been breathing for exactly 45 minutes. Everything in her life operated on precision. "No, ma'am. Don't call me ma'am. It makes me sound like someone's grandmother." Her lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. "Ms. Hale will suffice." "Yes, Ms. Hale." She leaned forward slightly. "I've been watching you, Daniel. May I call you Daniel?" "Of course." Something flickered across his face. Not fear exactly, but wariness. The look of a man who'd learned that attention from powerful people rarely ended well. "You've worked in my restaurants for 3 years, the flagship location downstairs for the past 18 months. Your supervisors speak highly of you. Never late, never complains, picks up shifts others won't take." Victoria paused, letting the words hang between them. "You're either remarkably dedicated or desperately in need of the money." Daniel's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "I do my job, Ms. Hale. That's all." "That's all?" She arched one perfectly sculpted eyebrow. "Most people want more than just doing their job. They want advancement, recognition, power." She said the last word like a prayer. "Don't you want those things, Daniel?" "I want to provide for my daughter." The words came out simple, unadorned by ambition or apology. Ah. There it was. Victoria had read his file, of course. Background checks on all employees were standard, but she'd gone deeper on this one. Daniel Carter, widowed 2 years ago when his wife Sarah was killed by a drunk driver on her way home from her nursing shift. Left with a 6-year-old daughter and a mountain of medical debt from Sarah's 3 days in the ICU before she died. No family money, no safety net. Just a man and his child against the grinding machinery of survival. Tell me about her, Victoria said, surprising herself. This wasn't part of the script she'd planned. For the first time, something genuine crossed Daniel's face, a softness that transformed his tired features. Lily just turned 6. She loves butterflies and thinks broccoli is the worst thing humans ever invented. She wants to be a veterinarian when she grows up, or maybe a princess. She hasn't decided if those are mutually exclusive yet. Despite herself, Victoria felt the corner of her mouth twitch. Smart girl, why choose when you can have both? That's what I told her. The waiter appeared then, Marcus, one of the senior staff, moving with the invisible efficiency of high-end service. He placed their first course without a word, seared scallops arranged like art on hand-painted porcelain. Daniel stared at his plate with the expression of a man who'd just been handed a Fabergé egg and asked to eat it. It's food, Daniel, not a test, Victoria said, though, of course, everything was a test. That was how she'd survived in a world that wanted to devour ambitious women. Her father had taught her that. Gerald Hale, who'd built Hale Industries from a single restaurant in Queens into a hospitality empire spanning 3 continents. He taught her to test everyone, trust no one, and never let emotion cloud judgment. The moment you start caring about what they think, you've already lost, he'd said, standing over her at 14 as she cried over a friendship that had crumbled under the weight of her family's expectations. You're a Hale. We don't lose. She'd learned the lesson well, maybe too well. Daniel picked up his fork with careful precision, as if worried he might use the wrong utensil and reveal himself as an imposter in this rarefied world. He needn't have worried. There was no wrong fork for scallops. But Victoria didn't correct him. She watched as he took a small bite, his eyes widening slightly. It's good, he said quietly, and the simple honesty of it struck her as more genuine than 1,000 rehearsed compliments from business associates who praised everything she did while plotting to take her place. The chef trained in Paris, Victoria said. I stole him from a 3 Michelin star restaurant. Cost me an obscene amount of money. Some things are worth it. Are they? She set down her fork, the scallop untouched. That's an interesting philosophy from someone who earns $13 an hour plus tips. The shift in tone was subtle but unmistakable. Daniel's fork paused halfway to his mouth before he carefully set it down. Ms. Hale, what is this really about? Direct. I appreciate that. Victoria leaned back in her chair, her fingers steepled beneath her chin. I'm going to tell you a story, Daniel, about my father. She watched his confusion deepen, but he said nothing, so she continued. Gerald Hale grew up in poverty, real poverty, not the trendy kind people write memoirs about. His father was a drunk who couldn't hold a job. His mother cleaned houses for people who looked through her like she was furniture. He learned early that the world respects exactly 2 things, money and the willingness to do whatever it takes to get it. Marcus appeared again, removing their first course and replacing it with the second, roasted duck breast with a cherry reduction that looked like liquid ruby in the candlelight. When my father opened his first restaurant, Victoria continued, he instituted a policy that seemed cruel to outsiders. Every new hire, after 3 months, would be called into his office and fired. Daniel's head snapped up. What? Fired, Victoria repeated, her voice steady. He'd list their failings, real or imagined, and tell them they were done. Then he'd watch how they responded. She paused, studying Daniel's face. He believed that a person's true character only emerges when they have nothing left to lose. The ones who begged revealed weakness. The ones who argued revealed ego. The ones who threatened revealed violence. And the very rare ones who accepted it with dignity, those were the ones he'd hire back. Those were the ones he'd invest in. The color had drained from Daniel's face. Ms. Hale, it's an antiquated test, Victoria said, cutting him off. Cruel even. The kind of thing that belongs to a different era, when men like my father could play with people's lives like chess pieces and call it leadership. Why are you telling me this? Victoria met his eyes across the table. In the candlelight, she could see the gold flecks in his brown irises, the tiny scar above his left eyebrow, the way his pulse jumped in his throat. Fear, but controlled fear. The kind that comes from experience with loss. Because, Daniel Carter, she said softly, each word precisely placed, you're fired. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the ambient noise of the city 60 floors below seemed to vanish, leaving only the sound of Daniel's breathing, steady at first, then faster, shallower. He didn't speak, didn't move, just stared at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Victoria had done this 4 times before in her career, always in private, always with careful calculation. She'd tested rising managers, promising executives, even once her own vice president. She'd seen rage, tears, bargaining, denial. She'd learned to predict human behavior the way meteorologists predict storms. But Daniel Carter wasn't following the script. He simply closed his eyes for a long moment. When he opened them again, they were glassy but clear. He swallowed once, hard, and then nodded, not in agreement but in understanding, in acceptance of a universe that took and took and took. "Okay," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Okay?" Victoria frowned. "This wasn't right. That's all you have to say?" "What would you like me to say, Ms. Hale?" He was looking at her now with something that might have been pity. "That this is unfair? That I've worked hard? That I need this job?" He shook his head slowly. "You already know all of that. You read my file. You know about Sarah, about Lily, about the bills I can barely keep ahead of. You know that losing this job means I'll probably lose the apartment within 3 months. That I'll have to pull Lily out of her school, the only stability she's had since her mother died." Each word landed like a physical blow, but Victoria kept her face impassive. This was the test. This was how you found truth. "And yet you're just accepting it?" she challenged. "What choice do I have?" Daniel's laugh was bitter and brief. "I learned something when Sarah died, Ms. Hale. I learned that the universe doesn't negotiate. It doesn't care about fair. It doesn't care about hard work or good intentions or how much you love someone. It just is. And you either survive it or you don't." He stood up then, carefully pushing his chair back, his movements deliberate and controlled. "Thank you for the meal. I'll clear out my locker tonight." "Sit down." Victoria's command cracked through the air like a whip. Daniel paused, but didn't sit. "Ms. Hale, I appreciate whatever psychological experiment this is supposed to be, but I have to pick up my daughter from her friend's house in 40 minutes, and the subway—" "I said sit down." Something in her tone must have registered because he lowered himself back into the chair, though his posture remained rigid, defensive. Victoria stood instead, moving to the window. Manhattan sprawled beneath them in all its chaotic glory, millions of lives intersecting and diverging, each person carrying their own weight of dreams and disappointments. From up here, they looked like stars, beautiful, distant, irrelevant. "You didn't beg," she said to the glass. "Would it have changed anything?" "No." She turned to face him. "But most people would have tried anyway. They would have appealed to my mercy, my sense of justice, my humanity." The last word tasted strange in her mouth. "You didn't. I've learned that dignity is about the only thing you can keep when everything else is taken away." Daniel's voice was steady now, grounded in some core of certainty that Victoria envied without understanding. "If I'm going to lose my job, I'd rather lose it on my terms." "And what about your daughter?" Victoria pressed, needing to find the crack, the breaking point. "You're just going to go home and tell Lily that Daddy lost another job?" That hit home. She saw it in the way his hands clenched on the armrests, the way his jaw worked as if chewing words too sharp to speak. But when Daniel finally responded, his voice was barely audible. "Please, don't let my daughter think I failed." The words struck Victoria like a physical blow. She'd been prepared for anger, for breakdown, for the desperate scrambling of self-preservation. She hadn't been prepared for this, for a man whose first thought in his own devastation was protecting his child's image of him. Something cracked inside her chest. Not broke. Victoria Hale didn't break, but cracked, letting in a thin stream of light she hadn't known she'd been blocking. "You didn't fail, Daniel." "Then why—" "The test was never about whether you'd keep your job," Victoria said quietly, returning to her seat. "It was about who you are when you think you've lost everything." Understanding dawned across his features, followed immediately by something darker. Not anger exactly, but a kind of weary disappointment that was somehow worse. "That's cruel," he said simply. "Yes." Victoria didn't flinch from the accusation. "It is." "Do you enjoy it, watching people at their lowest?" The question hung between them, honest and cutting. Victoria considered lying. She was good at lying, had made an art form of it in boardrooms and investor meetings. But something about this moment, this man, demanded truth. I don't know anymore, she admitted. My father taught me that sentiment is weakness, that to lead, you must be willing to make hard choices without flinching, without feeling. She traced the rim of her wine glass, watching the light refract through the burgundy liquid. He tested me too, you know. When I was 16, he told me I wasn't smart enough to run Hale Industries, that I should focus on finding a good husband instead. Daniel's expression shifted slightly. But you're the CEO. I am, because I spent the next decade proving him wrong. I worked twice as hard as every man around me. I made decisions others were too afraid to make. I learned to bury everything soft and vulnerable until I wasn't sure it existed anymore. She met his eyes. And when my father was dying, when he finally admitted I'd exceeded every expectation, that I'd become everything he'd hoped, do you know what I felt? What? Nothing. The word fell flat and final between them. I felt nothing at all. And I think that scared him in the end. The monster he'd created. For a long moment, they sat in silence. The city glowed beyond the windows, indifferent to their small human drama playing out in this tower of glass and steel. You're not fired, Victoria said finally. Your position is secure. In fact, I'm giving you a raise. $22 an hour, and I'm putting you on the management track if you want it. Daniel's face remained unreadable. And if I say no? Then you remain a server at your current wage, which I'm also increasing to $18 an hour. This isn't a transaction, Daniel. I'm not buying your compliance. Then what are you buying? The question was fair. Victoria considered it carefully before answering. Maybe understanding. Maybe a mirror to show me what I've become. She stood, signaling the end of their meal. Take the weekend to think about the management position. We'll talk Monday. Daniel rose as well, but he didn't move toward the door. Instead, he studied her with an intensity that made her want to look away, though she didn't. Ms. Hale, he said carefully, I appreciate the raise. I do. It'll help. But I want you to understand something. What's that? That test you ran? It didn't show you who I am at my lowest. You want to see that? You should have been there the night Sarah died, when I had to tell my 4-year-old daughter that Mommy wasn't coming home, when I held her while she cried herself to sleep and then sat in the bathroom with a bottle of sleeping pills, trying to decide if the world would be better off without me in it. Victoria felt the blood drain from her face. Daniel, I'm not telling you this for sympathy, he continued, his voice steady despite the weight of the words. I'm telling you because you need to know that your little test, it's nothing. It's a game for people who've never actually lost anything that mattered. And the fact that you think it reveals character tells me more about you than anything I said or didn't say tonight. He moved toward the door then, pausing with his hand on the frame. I'll take the raise. I need it. But I won't take the management position. I don't want to become someone who tests people like lab rats to satisfy their own curiosity about human nature. That's not what Victoria started, but Daniel was already gone, the elevator doors closing on his retreating figure. She stood alone in the dining room, surrounded by wealth and power and the ruins of her certainty. Marcus appeared silently to clear the table, but she waved him away. For the first time in 20 years, Victoria Hale sat down and allowed herself to feel the full weight of her isolation. The empire she'd built stretched around her like a beautiful prison. She'd tested everyone, trusted no one, and somewhere along the way she'd forgotten what it felt like to be human. Daniel Carter had walked away from her offer with more dignity than she'd shown in offering it. He'd seen through her test, called it what it was, cruelty dressed as wisdom, and refused to participate in perpetuating it. And Victoria, who'd spent her entire adult life certain of her own superiority, suddenly wasn't certain of anything at all. The weekend passed in a blur of routine that felt anything but routine. Victoria attended a charity gala on Saturday, wrote a check for $500,000 to a children's hospital, smiled for photographs, made small talk with people whose names she'd forget by morning. On Sunday, she reviewed quarterly reports in her home office, while her housekeeper moved silently through the penthouse, tidying spaces that were already immaculate. She tried not to think about Daniel Carter. Failed spectacularly. Monday morning arrived with the kind of punishing sunshine that made hangovers worse. Victoria didn't have a hangover. She'd had exactly one glass of wine the night before, the same measured amount she allowed herself every evening, but she felt hungover anyway, her thoughts slow and sticky with something she refused to name as guilt. She arrived at the tower at 6:47 a.m., as always, rode the elevator to her office on the 65th floor, as always, settled behind her desk with her first espresso of the day, as always. Everything was as always, except nothing felt the same. At 7:15, her assistant Margaret buzzed through. "Ms. Hale, you have your usual breakfast with the department heads at 8, followed by the investor call at 9:30, and—" "Cancel the breakfast," Victoria said abruptly. A pause. "Cancel it? Reschedule for tomorrow. I have something else to attend to." She could practically hear Margaret's confusion crackling through the intercom, but the woman was too professional to question. "Of course, Ms. Hale. Should I let them know?" "Just reschedule it, Margaret." Victoria killed the connection and sat staring at her computer screen without seeing it. What was she doing? She had a company to run, decisions to make, an empire to maintain. Rearranging her schedule to, what? Check on a restaurant server who'd already made clear he wanted nothing to do with her management track? But she found herself standing anyway, straightening her jacket, heading for the elevator. The restaurant didn't open until 11, but prep started at 7. Victoria had designed it that way. Fresh ingredients, everything made to order, nothing frozen or reheated. It was one of the things that set Hale restaurants apart from the competition. One of the reasons they could charge $40 for a burger and have people line up for the privilege. She took the elevator down to the ground floor, then the service stairs to the restaurant's kitchen entrance. The sounds of organized chaos filtered through the door, the clang of pans, the sharp commands of the head chef, the underlying rhythm of preparation that turned disparate ingredients into art. Victoria pushed through the door. The kitchen fell silent. 20 staff members froze mid-task, staring at her like she'd materialized from another dimension. Which, in a way, she had. Victoria Hale didn't visit kitchens. She reviewed profit margins and approved menu changes, but she didn't walk among the actual workers who made her empire function. "As you were," she said, but nobody moved. They just stared. Chef Bernard recovered first, a barrel-chested man from Lyon who'd once thrown a sauté pan at a food critic. "Ms. Hale," he said in his thick accent, wiping his hands on his apron. "Is there problem?" "No problem. I'm looking for Daniel Carter." "Daniel?" Bernard's bushy eyebrows rose. "He is not here yet. He arrives at 8 for lunch shift." "Of course." Victoria checked her watch. 7:28. She'd miscalculated, let her impulse override logic. "Right. Thank you, chef." She turned to leave, but Bernard called after her. "Ms. Hale? Daniel is good worker. Very reliable. If there is problem, there's no problem," Victoria said, softer this time. "Thank you." She took the stairs back up, feeling foolish. What had she planned to say anyway? "Sorry for playing mind games with your livelihood? Thanks for calling me on my bullshit? Let's grab coffee and discuss your trauma?" Back in her office, Victoria tried to focus on work. She made it through exactly 37 minutes of email before giving up and buzzing Margaret. "Yes, Ms. Hale? I need you to pull something for me. Employee file for Daniel Carter, server in the flagship restaurant." Another pause, this one longer. "Is there an issue I should be aware of?" "No issue. Just pull the file." 10 minutes later, Margaret appeared at her door with a slim folder. "Here's what we have on Mr. Carter. Standard employment records, background check, emergency contacts." Victoria took the file but didn't open it. Margaret lingered in the doorway. "That'll be all," Victoria said. "Ms. Hale?" Margaret hesitated, which was unusual. The woman had worked for Victoria for 8 years and learned to anticipate needs before they were spoken. "May I speak freely? When have I ever stopped you? You've pulled exactly 4 employee files in the entire time I've worked for you. Each time, it preceded a major personnel decision." Margaret's expression was carefully neutral. "Should I be preparing documentation?" Smart woman. Too smart sometimes. "No documentation. This is personal." "Personal." Margaret repeated the word like she was testing its weight. "I see. You're hovering, Margaret." "I'm concerned." Victoria looked up sharply. "About?" About the fact that you're acting out of character. And in my experience, when powerful people act out of character, it usually means something significant is about to happen. She smoothed her skirt. I'm just hoping whatever it is doesn't blow back on the staff. Your concern is noted. Close the door on your way out. Margaret left, but her words lingered, acting out of character. Was that what this was? Victoria opened the file. The photograph clipped to the first page showed a younger Daniel, taken 3 years ago when he was first hired. His smile in the ID photo was genuine, reaching his eyes. The man she'd had dinner with Friday night didn't smile like that anymore. She wondered when he'd lost it. Probably the night his wife died, sitting in a hospital waiting room while doctors performed futile surgery. She flipped through the pages. Previous employment, construction, warehouse work, briefly a teaching assistant before Lily was born. Education, bachelor's degree in English literature from a state school, graduated with honors. Emergency contact, Mrs. Linda Chen, neighbor, with a note. Primary guardian for daughter in case of emergency. No family, no safety net, just Daniel and Lily against the world. Victoria closed the file and pressed her palms against her eyes. What was she doing? What did she want from this man? The truth crept in slowly, unwelcome. She wanted to understand him. Wanted to know how someone could maintain dignity and humanity after the universe had taken everything. Wanted to learn whatever secret allowed Daniel Carter to care about his daughter's image of him more than his own survival. Because Victoria, who'd built an empire, who commanded respect and fear in equal measure, who'd never lost a negotiation or backed down from a challenge. Victoria didn't know how to do any of that. At 8 a.m., she went back to the kitchen. This time Daniel was there, tying on his apron while listening to Bernard's rapid-fire instructions in French-accented English. He looked tired, the kind of bone-deep exhaustion that comes from chronic stress rather than a single late night. He saw her immediately. Something shuddered in his expression. "Daniel," she said, ignoring the kitchen staff who'd once again frozen at her appearance. "Could I speak with you? Privately?" He glanced at Bernard, who shrugged. "Go. But be quick. We have prep to finish." They stepped into the hallway outside the kitchen, the door muffling the noise to a dull roar. Daniel leaned against the wall, arms crossed, waiting. "I wanted to apologize," Victoria said. "You already apologized." "Friday night." "No, Friday night I explained. That's not the same as apologizing." She took a breath. "What I did was cruel. You were right about that. It was a game for someone who's never actually lost anything that mattered. And I'm sorry." Daniel studied her for a long moment. "Why? Why am I sorry? Why did you do it in the first place?" He pushed off the wall, his tiredness giving way to something sharper. "You're one of the richest women in New York. You could have just offered me the raise, the promotion, whatever, but you chose to terrorize me first, so I'm asking, why?" It was a fair question. Victoria wished she had a good answer. "Because my father taught me to," she said finally. "Because I've spent my entire life believing that's how you lead, by testing people's limits, by seeing who breaks and who bends. Because I've built everything I have on the foundation of not trusting anyone's performance, only their reaction to pressure. And now? Now I'm not sure my father was right about everything." Daniel's laugh was short and bitter. "Must be nice, having the luxury to question your beliefs. Some of us are too busy surviving to philosophize about our upbringing." The words stung because they were true. "You're right," Victoria acknowledged. "I'm sorry, I shouldn't have come down here. This was—" She stopped, frustrated with herself. "I don't know what this was." She turned to leave, but Daniel's voice stopped her. "Ms. Hale?" "Yes?" "That thing you said Friday, about feeling nothing when your father died." He was looking at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "That's not strength, that's damage. And the fact that you can't tell the difference is probably the saddest thing I've heard in a long time." Then he went back into the kitchen, leaving Victoria alone in the hallway with the uncomfortable truth of his observation echoing in her mind. Damage, not strength. Damage. She'd built an empire on damage and called it success. Victoria Hale returned to her office on the 65th floor, sat behind her desk of imported mahogany, and for the first time in 20 years, allowed herself to wonder if she'd been wrong about everything. The word followed Victoria through the next 3 days like a shadow she couldn't shake. Damage. She caught herself thinking about it during board meetings, while reviewing acquisition proposals, even while approving the new seasonal menu that Chef Bernard had spent weeks perfecting. The empire continued to run with mechanical precision. Profits up, expansion on schedule, shareholders pleased. But something fundamental had shifted in how she experienced all of it. For the first time in her carefully constructed life, Victoria Hale felt like a stranger in her own skin. By Thursday afternoon, she'd made a decision that Margaret would later describe as uncharacteristic, bordering on alarming. She was going to observe the restaurant floor during dinner service. "You want a what?" Margaret had asked, her professional composure finally cracking. "Observe dinner service. Is that unclear? Ms. Hale, you haven't set foot in the dining room during operating hours in over 2 years. The last time you did, you fired the maitre d' for improper fork placement. He placed the salad fork on the wrong side. It was off by half an inch." Victoria had waved away the objection. "Clear my schedule from 6 to 10 tonight." Now standing in the small manager's office adjacent to the kitchen, Victoria watched the dining room through the one-way glass that she'd had installed for precisely this purpose. The restaurant was filling up with the early dinner crowd, couples celebrating anniversaries, business associates courting clients, tourists who'd saved for months to afford a single meal in a place like this. And moving among them, Daniel Carter. She'd told herself she was here to observe general operations, to ensure quality standards were being maintained. But her eyes kept tracking back to him, watching the way he moved through the space with quiet efficiency. There was an economy to his movements, no wasted energy, each action purposeful. He wasn't the fastest server. That distinction belonged to Marcus, who could clear a 5-course table in under 2 minutes. But Daniel was meticulous, patient. "Can I get you anything, Ms. Hale?" Victoria turned to find James Morrison, the evening manager, hovering nervously in the doorway. He was young for the position, 31, and ambitious in that transparent way that made her tired. "No, James, just continue as normal." "Of course. I wasn't aware you'd be observing tonight, or I would have—" "That's the point of unannounced observations." She turned back to the window. "Carry on." He left, but she could feel his anxiety radiating through the walls. Good. Anxious managers were attentive managers. Victoria's attention returned to the floor. Daniel was at table 12 now, taking an order from a couple who looked to be in their 70s. The woman was speaking animatedly, her hands moving as she described something, and Daniel was actually listening, not the performative listening she saw in most service staff, but genuine attention. He nodded, smiled slightly, said something that made the woman laugh. When he walked away, the couple leaned toward each other with the comfortable intimacy of decades, and Victoria felt a pang of something she refused to name as loneliness. The evening progressed. Victoria watched Daniel handle a difficult customer at table 7, a man in an expensive suit who sent back his steak twice. She couldn't hear the conversation through the glass, but she could read Daniel's body language. Apologetic but not obsequious, professional but not cold. By the time he returned with the third steak, the man was mollified. Victoria saw money exchange hands, a tip, probably generous given the man's expression. At 8:15, the kitchen door swung open and a little girl burst through. Victoria's breath caught. Lily Carter was smaller than she'd expected from the file photo, all wild dark curls and knobby knees, wearing a purple dress that had seen better days and rain boots decorated with butterflies. She clutched a worn stuffed rabbit under one arm and looked around the dining room with wide eyes. Daniel appeared immediately, his professional mask cracking into something raw and tender. He crouched down to Lily's level, and Victoria found herself leaning closer to the glass, trying to read lips. "Baby, what are you doing here? Where's Mrs. Chen?" Through the window, Victoria could see Lily's response, animated hand gestures, the universal language of 6-year-old explanation. Daniel's expression shifted from confusion to concern. He glanced around the dining room, clearly torn between his daughter and his duties. Victoria made a decision. She left the office and walked onto the floor. The change in atmosphere was immediate. Conversations didn't stop exactly, but they stuttered. Staff members' eyes widened. James materialized at her elbow within seconds. "Ms. Hale, is there a problem?" "No problem." She moved past him toward table 12, where Daniel had just straightened up, still holding Lily's hand. "Ms. Hale?" Daniel's voice was carefully neutral, but she could see the tension in his shoulders. I apologize for the disruption. Mrs. Chen had a family emergency, and Lily's school called me to pick her up early. I'm just going to take your daughter to the break room, Victoria interrupted. I'll have someone bring her dinner. Daniel blinked. What? The break room. Fourth door on the left past the kitchen. It has a television and comfortable chairs. She can wait there until your shift ends. Victoria looked down at Lily, who was staring up at her with the unfiltered curiosity of childhood. What do you like to eat, Lily? The little girl glanced at her father, who nodded almost imperceptibly. Chicken nuggets, Lily said in a small voice. And French fries. And chocolate milk. Please. Please, Victoria repeated, something twisting in her chest. When was the last time someone had said please to her and meant it as courtesy rather than desperation? Chef Bernard can manage that. Go with your father. Daniel looked like he wanted to argue, but professional survival instinct won out. Thank you, Ms. Hale. I'll make up the time. You'll do no such thing. Go. She watched them disappear into the back, Lily's butterfly boots squeaking against the tile floor, and felt the weight of every eye in the restaurant on her back. Let them look. Let them gossip. She'd built an empire by not caring what people thought, except now she was starting to wonder if that was true, or just another story she'd told herself to justify the isolation. Victoria returned to the manager's office, but her observation of general operations had become something more specific. She watched Daniel return to the floor 15 minutes later, his movements perhaps slightly hurried but otherwise unchanged. She watched him check on his tables, refill water glasses, deliver orders with the same quiet competence, and she found herself wondering what it cost him to maintain that composure when his daughter was sitting in a break room eating chicken nuggets instead of at home doing homework or playing with friends. At 9:30, Victoria made another decision that Margaret would have questioned. She went to the break room. Lily was curled up in one of the oversized chairs, her stuffed rabbit tucked under her chin, watching a cartoon on the small television mounted in the corner. The remains of her dinner sat on the table. She'd eaten every chicken nugget but only half the fries. The little girl looked up when Victoria entered, her eyes going wide. "Hi," Lily said uncertainly. "Hello?" Victoria realized she had no idea how to talk to children. She dealt with corporate executives, investors, politicians, people who spoke the language of power and money. 6-year-olds operated on entirely different wavelengths. "I'm Victoria." "I know, you're Daddy's boss." Lily hugged her rabbit tighter. "He said I have to be very quiet and not bother anyone." "You're not bothering anyone." Victoria sat down in the chair across from her, suddenly aware of how ridiculous she must look in her tailored Armani suit surrounded by break room furniture from an office supply catalog. "Is your dinner okay?" "It's really good. The chicken nuggets are crispy, but not too crispy." This was apparently important. "Mrs. Chen makes them in the microwave and they get soggy." "Microwave chicken nuggets are a tragedy," Victoria said seriously. Lily giggled, a sound like wind chimes. "That's what Daddy says. He says someday he's going to open a restaurant where everything is made fresh and nothing comes from the freezer." "Does he?" Victoria leaned forward slightly. "What else does your daddy say?" "He says," Lily paused, thinking hard. "He says that Mommy is watching us from heaven and that she's proud of me. And he says that even when things are hard, we have to be brave. And he says that love is the most important thing in the whole world, even more important than money." The words landed like small bombs in Victoria's chest. "Your daddy sounds very wise." "He is." Lily's certainty was absolute. "He's the best daddy in the whole world. He makes me pancakes on Sundays even when he's really tired, and he reads me 3 stories every night, and when I have bad dreams, he lets me sleep in his bed. And he's teaching me to ride a bike without training wheels, even though I keep falling down." "Do you get back up?" Victoria asked. "When you fall?" "Most of the time. Sometimes I cry first." Lily said this matter-of-factly. "But Daddy says it's okay to cry. He says crying means you care about something, and caring is good." Victoria sat back in her chair, feeling something fundamental crack inside her chest. This child, this 6-year-old girl with butterfly boots and a worn stuffed rabbit, understood more about being human than Victoria had learned in 42 years. "Your daddy is right," Victoria said quietly. "Caring is good." They sat in companionable silence for a moment, the cartoon playing softly in the background. Then Lily spoke again, her voice smaller. Miss Victoria, can I ask you something? Of course. Is my daddy going to lose his job? Victoria felt her heart stop. What makes you think that? Because he's been worried all week. He doesn't think I notice, but I do. He gets this line right here. She pointed to the space between her eyebrows. And he doesn't eat very much dinner, and he checks his phone a lot like he's waiting for bad news. Lily's eyes were too old for her face. The last time he was like this was when Mommy died. The casual way she said it, when Mommy died, hit Victoria harder than any business reversal ever had. This was a child who had learned that bad things happen, that security is temporary, that the people you love can disappear without warning. Lily, Victoria said, leaning forward until they were eye level, your daddy is not going to lose his job. I promise you that. Really? Hope bloomed in those dark eyes. Really. In fact, your daddy is one of the best people who works for me. I'm very lucky to have him. Lily studied her with the intensity of childhood, looking for lies. Whatever she saw must have satisfied her because she nodded slowly. Okay, I believe you. Good. Victoria stood, feeling the weight of that promise settle onto her shoulders. I should let you get back to your show. Miss Victoria? Yes? Thank you for the chicken nuggets. They were really good. Victoria smiled, a real smile, not the corporate mask she wore for cameras and board meetings. You're welcome, Lily. She left the break room and nearly collided with Daniel in the hallway. He'd clearly been approaching, probably checking on his daughter during a brief lull in service. Ms. Hale. His voice was tight. I didn't realize you were She's fine. We were just talking. Victoria paused. You've raised a remarkable child. Something in Daniel's expression softened. She's my whole world. I can tell. Victoria looked back toward the break room. She told me about your dream, opening a restaurant where everything is made fresh. Daniel looked embarrassed. That's just something I talk about with her. A someday thing. Not realistic for someone in my position. Why not? Because dreams require capital, Ms. Hale. They require education and connections and time to develop business plans. They require not living paycheck to paycheck. He said it without bitterness, just stating facts. They require being someone other than who I am. Victoria wanted to argue, to tell him he was wrong, to offer solutions. But she'd learned something in the past week. Sometimes people didn't want solutions from her. Sometimes they just wanted to be heard. For what it's worth, she said instead, I think you'd run an excellent restaurant. Daniel's surprise was evident. Thank you. That actually means something coming from you. They stood in the awkward silence of two people who'd been forced into unwanted intimacy, neither quite sure how to proceed. Finally, Daniel spoke. I should get back to my tables. Of course. And Daniel? Yes? Your daughter asked me if you were going to lose your job. Victoria watched his face pale. I told her you weren't. I told her you were one of the best people who works for me. I meant it. She walked away before he could respond, leaving him in the hallway with the weight of promises she was only beginning to understand how to keep. The next morning, Victoria did something she hadn't done in 15 years. She called her mother. Patricia Hale lived in a sprawling estate in Connecticut, surrounded by gardens she didn't tend and art she didn't look at. She'd divorced Gerald 3 years before his death, citing irreconcilable differences, which was a polite way of saying she couldn't watch him destroy himself anymore. Victoria had sided with her father in the divorce. It had seemed like the strong choice at the time. Now, listening to the phone ring, she wondered if it had just been the easy one. Victoria, her mother's voice held surprised pleasure. Is everything all right? Why wouldn't it be? Because you only call on Christmas and my birthday, and it's currently neither. Fair point. I wanted to talk to you about something, about Dad. A long pause. All right, I'm listening. Victoria realized she'd been pacing her penthouse, wearing a path in the Persian rug that cost more than most people's cars. She forced herself to sit. Do you remember his test? The one where he'd fire people to see how they'd react? Of course I remember. Patricia's voice went cold. I hated that test. Thought it was needlessly cruel. Did you ever tell him that? Many times. He always said I didn't understand business, that sentiment had no place in leadership. A bitter laugh. He was probably right. I didn't understand his version of business. Still don't. Victoria gripped the phone tighter. Mom, did you ever think Dad was wrong about how to treat people? Victoria, I divorced your father because I thought he was wrong about almost everything that mattered. Patricia's voice softened. He was brilliant in business. I'll give him that. But he confused ruthlessness with strength, isolation with independence. He built an empire and died surrounded by employees who respected him and colleagues who feared him, but not a single person who truly knew him. The words cut deep because they were true. Gerald Hale's funeral had been attended by hundreds, titans of industry, politicians, socialites, but the eulogies had all been about his accomplishments, never about who he was as a person, because nobody had known who he was, maybe not even himself. I did the test, Victoria admitted quietly. Last week, on one of my employees. Oh, Victoria! Her mother's disappointment was gentle but unmistakable. Why? Because it's what Dad taught me, because I thought it would reveal character. And did it? Victoria thought about Daniel's quiet dignity, about Lily's butterfly boots, about the way caring for his daughter was so thoroughly woven into his identity that he couldn't separate one from the other. Yes, she said. Just not the character I expected. They talked for another hour, really talked, for the first time in years. Patricia told her about the art classes she'd been taking, the book club she'd joined, the small ways she'd rebuilt a life after decades of living in Gerald's shadow. Victoria found herself envying her mother's courage to start over. When they finally said goodbye, Patricia left her with a question. What are you going to do now? Victoria didn't have an answer yet, but she was starting to think she needed to find one. The answer began to take shape over the following week, though not in any way Victoria had anticipated. She started showing up at the restaurant more frequently, not to observe from behind glass, but to be present. She'd arrived during prep and watched Chef Bernard train his staff, noting the way he balanced criticism with encouragement, how he made excellence seem achievable rather than impossible. She'd linger during service, learning the rhythm of the floor, understanding how a well-run restaurant was like an orchestra where every instrument mattered. And she watched Daniel, not with the calculating assessment of a CEO evaluating an asset, but with something closer to curiosity. She noticed things. How he remembered regular customers' preferences without checking notes, how he diffused tension with difficult diners through patience rather than confrontation, how he moved through the space like he was dancing with it rather than fighting it. She also noticed that he arrived at 7:45 every morning instead of 8 o'clock, using the extra 15 minutes to help the prep cooks with setup, that he often worked through his breaks, covering for colleagues who needed to make phone calls or catch their breath, that he never left until everything was perfect, even if it meant staying an extra 20 minutes off the clock. On Tuesday, Victoria pulled James Morrison aside. Daniel Carter, she said, how much does he make in tips? James consulted his tablet. Depends on the night, but he averages about $200 per shift. Good for our establishment, though Marcus usually pulls in more. Why does Marcus make more? He's faster, handles more tables. Daniel's methodical, which some customers love, but it means smaller volume. Victoria nodded, filing away the information. Thank you, James. On Wednesday, she intercepted Daniel in the hallway before his shift. Ms. Hale. He was wary now, had been since their conversation about Lily, like he'd revealed too much and was trying to rebuild his walls. Walk with me. It wasn't a request. They moved through the service corridors in silence until they reached the elevator bay. Victoria pressed the button for the 65th floor. Ms. Hale, my shift starts in 10 minutes. This won't take long. The elevator rose in smooth silence. Daniel shifted his weight, uncomfortable in the small space, uncomfortable in her presence. Victoria couldn't blame him. Her office was exactly as she'd left it that morning, pristine, organized, impersonal. She gestured for Daniel to sit in one of the chairs facing her desk. He did, perched on the edge, like a bird ready for flight. I've been thinking about our conversation, Victoria began, settling into her own chair. About your restaurant dream. Ms. Hale, that was just, let me finish. She pulled a folder from her desk drawer. Hale Industries has an internal development program. We identify promising talent and provide them with resources, business training, mentorship, seed capital, to develop new concepts under the Hale umbrella. Daniel was very still. I'm aware of the program. Then you're aware that we typically recruit from management, people with hospitality degrees and industry connections. Victoria pushed the folder across the desk. I'd like to make an exception. He didn't touch the folder. Why? Because you understand something most people in this industry have forgotten. That hospitality isn't about efficiency or profit margins. It's about making people feel cared for. That's a rare gift, Daniel, and I think it's worth investing in. This is guilt, Daniel said flatly. You feel bad about the test, so you're trying to... This is business, Victoria interrupted. If it were just guilt, I'd write you a check and feel absolved. This is me recognizing talent and wanting to develop it. There's a difference. Daniel finally reached for the folder, opening it slowly. Victoria watched his eyes move across the pages. The program overview, the application requirements, the funding structure. His expression remained carefully neutral, but she saw the moment his breath caught, the tiny pause that meant something had landed. This is a 2-year program, he said quietly. Yes, I'd have to reduce my restaurant hours to attend classes. We'd maintain your current salary during the program. You'd also receive a stipend for childcare costs. His head snapped up. Why? Because talent development requires investment, and because Lily shouldn't suffer because her father is trying to build a better future. Victoria met his eyes. This isn't charity, Daniel. If you enter this program, I'll expect results. I'll expect dedication and innovation and excellence. I'll expect you to work harder than you've ever worked in your life. And at the end of it, if you succeed, you'll develop a restaurant concept that Hale Industries will fund, and you'll operate as head chef and managing partner. And if I fail, then you'll have 2 years of business education and experience that will make you valuable anywhere in this industry. Victoria leaned back in her chair. But I don't think you'll fail. You survived the worst thing that could happen to you and kept going. Business school will be easy in comparison. Daniel was quiet for a long time, staring at the folder like it might disappear if he looked away. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough. I need to think about it. Of course, take the weekend. Victoria stood, signaling the end of the meeting. But Daniel, don't say no because you think you don't deserve it. Say no because it's not what you want. Those are very different reasons. He left with the folder tucked under his arm, his expression unreadable. Victoria watched him go and wondered if she'd just made the best business decision of her career or the worst. She got her answer Friday night in the most unexpected way possible. It started with a phone call at 11:47 p.m. Victoria was reviewing quarterly projections in her penthouse, a glass of wine at her elbow, when her personal cell rang. The number was unfamiliar, but something made her answer. Hello? Ms. Hale? The voice was young, frightened. This is Linda Chen. I'm Daniel Carter's neighbor. I'm so sorry to call you this late, but I didn't know who else. Victoria was already moving, grabbing her keys, her coat. What happened? It's Lily. She's sick, really sick. Daniel called an ambulance about 20 minutes ago, and they took her to Metropolitan General. Mrs. Chen's voice broke. He was so scared, Ms. Hale. And he doesn't have anyone else, and I thought maybe, I'm on my way. Text me the address. Victoria had a driver, of course, a man on call 24 hours for exactly these situations, but she didn't call him. She grabbed her own keys and headed for the parking garage where her rarely used Tesla sat gathering dust. The city was quieter at midnight, but still alive in that particularly New York way. Late shift workers heading home, early shift workers heading out, people whose lives happened in the margins of everyone else's daylight. Victoria drove faster than was strictly legal, her mind racing through possibilities. Pneumonia, appendicitis, meningitis, all the terrifying words that meant childhood fragility. Metropolitan General was a public hospital in Queens, the kind of place Victoria had never had reason to visit. The emergency room was crowded even at this hour, crying babies, elderly people in wheelchairs, a young man holding a bloody towel to his head. The fluorescent lights were harsh, unforgiving. Everything smelled like antiseptic and desperation. She found Daniel in the waiting area, hunched forward with his head in his hands. He looked up when she approached, and the raw fear in his eyes made her chest tight. Ms. Hale? He stood awkwardly, confused. What are you? Mrs. Chen called me. What happened? I don't know. She was fine at dinner, laughing and playing, and then around 11 she woke up crying. She had a fever, 103.5, and she was saying her head hurt and her neck was stiff. And I thought, his voice cracked. The paramedics said it could be meningitis. They're running tests now. Victoria sat down in the plastic chair next to him. When will you know? They said an hour, maybe 2. They're doing a spinal tap to... He couldn't finish the sentence. Okay. Victoria's mind shifted into problem-solving mode. The same clarity that served her in boardrooms now applied to crisis management. Have you eaten? What? Have you eaten dinner? No, I don't think so. There's a cafeteria. I'll get us both something. Ms. Hale, you don't have to. I know I don't have to. She stood. But I'm going to anyway. Don't argue. The cafeteria was a depressing affair. Vending machines and sad sandwiches under heat lamps. Victoria bought 2 bottles of water, 2 packages of crackers, and 2 cups of what the machine optimistically labeled as coffee. It was terrible, but it was hot and caffeinated, which seemed like the priority. When she returned, Daniel was on the phone, his voice low and strained. I understand, Mrs. Chen. No, you did the right thing. Yes, I'll call as soon as I know anything. Thank you. He hung up and accepted the coffee Victoria offered, wrapping his hands around the cup like it was a lifeline. They sat in silence for a while, the background noise of the ER washing over them. Announcements on the PA system, the squeak of gurneys, distant crying. Victoria had never felt more out of place in her life. This wasn't her world. Her world was controlled environments and predictable outcomes. This was chaos and powerlessness. I keep thinking about Sarah, Daniel said suddenly, how she was fine one moment and gone the next, how I couldn't protect her. He stared at his coffee. And now Lily, and I can't protect her either. What's the point of being a parent if you can't keep them safe? Victoria didn't have an answer, but she remembered what Lily had said about caring being good, about crying meaning you cared about something. The point, she said slowly, is loving them anyway, even when you can't protect them, maybe especially then. Daniel looked at her, something shifting in his expression. When did you get so wise? I'm not wise. I'm just learning that there are different kinds of strength than the ones I was taught to value. Victoria set down her terrible coffee. Your daughter told me something last week. She said love is the most important thing in the world, even more important than money. I think she learned that from you. She learned it from Sarah. Daniel's voice was soft. Sarah used to say that success wasn't about what you accumulated, but about who you loved and who loved you back. I thought it was naive when we first met. We were both in college, and I was so focused on ambition and career plans. She was studying nursing because she wanted to help people. I couldn't understand why someone smart enough to be a doctor would choose nursing instead. Why did she? Because doctors save lives, but nurses hold hands while they do it. A ghost of a smile crossed his face. She said the world had plenty of brilliant people, but not enough kind ones. She wanted to be kind. Victoria felt something crack wider in her chest. She sounds extraordinary. She was, and now Lily is becoming just like her, thoughtful and generous and brave in ways I'll never be. His hands tightened on the cup. If anything happens to her, Mr. Carter? They both jumped. A doctor stood in the doorway, young, tired, wearing scrubs decorated with cartoon characters. Daniel stood so fast he nearly knocked over his coffee. Is she... She's going to be fine, the doctor said, and Victoria watched Daniel's knees nearly give out from relief. It's not meningitis. It's a severe ear infection that spread to cause temporary neck stiffness. We've started her on IV antibiotics, and she's already responding well. Her fever's down to 101. Can I see her? Of course. She's been asking for you. Daniel turned to Victoria, his eyes bright with unshed tears. Thank you for coming, for staying. You didn't have to... Go see your daughter, Victoria said gently. We can talk later. But she didn't leave. She sat in that uncomfortable plastic chair while Daniel disappeared into the treatment area, and she thought about Sarah Carter, who chose kindness over ambition. About Lily, who believed love was more important than money. About Daniel, who measured success in moments with his daughter rather than zeros in a bank account. And she thought about herself, about the empire she'd built on her father's principles, about the isolation she'd mistaken for strength, about the damage she'd accumulated and called achievement. 20 minutes later, Daniel emerged carrying Lily, who was awake but drowsy, an IV still attached to her small arm. She was wrapped in a hospital blanket, her head resting on her father's shoulder. She saw Victoria and gave a small wave. "Hi, Miss Victoria." "Hi, Lily." Victoria stood. "I hear you're going to be okay." "The doctor said I have an ear infection. That's why everything hurt." Lily's voice was sleepy. "Daddy says we can go home soon." "That's good news." "Miss Victoria?" Lily's eyes were already closing. "Thank you for the chicken nuggets. They were really good." She was asleep before finishing the sentence, her small body relaxing completely in her father's arms. Daniel adjusted her carefully, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "They're keeping her for observation until morning," he explained quietly, "making sure the antibiotics are working. Mrs. Chen can't come until later, so I'm going to—" "I'll stay," Victoria heard herself say. Daniel blinked. "What?" "I'll stay with you, in case you need anything." She met his surprised gaze. "Unless you'd prefer to be alone." For a long moment, he just looked at her. This billionaire CEO in her designer coat, standing in a public hospital waiting room at 2 a.m., offering to sit through the long hours of childhood illness. "I'd like the company," he said finally. "Thank you." They settled into a private room, small but clean, with a cot for Daniel and a single uncomfortable chair that Victoria claimed. Lily was transferred to a proper bed, monitors beeping softly, IV fluids dripping steadily. Daniel sat on the edge of the cot, watching his daughter sleep with the intensity of a man who'd learned that nothing was guaranteed. Victoria watched him watch her and understood something fundamental about love, how it made you vulnerable and fierce in equal measure, how it demanded everything and promised nothing except the privilege of caring. "The program," Daniel said suddenly, breaking the silence. "I want to do it." Victoria looked up from her phone, where she'd been pretending to check emails. "Are you sure?" "No." He managed a weak smile. "But I think that's okay. I think the best decisions are probably the scary ones." He glanced at Lily. "She deserves a father who tries, not one who's too afraid to fail." "For what it's worth," Victoria said, "I don't think you'll fail." "You barely know me." "I know enough." She set her phone aside. "I know you survived the worst loss imaginable and kept going. I know you work double shifts and still make time for bedtime stories. I know you measure your worth in your daughter's laughter rather than your bank account. That's more than enough." Daniel was quiet for a moment, processing. "Can I ask you something, Ms. Hale?" "Victoria, at 2 a.m. in a hospital room, I think we can drop the formalities." "Victoria, then." He leaned back against the wall. "Why are you really doing this? The program, being here tonight, all of it?" It was the same question he'd asked before, but now Victoria had a different answer. "Because your daughter taught me something important," she said. "She taught me that caring isn't weakness. And you taught me that strength isn't about testing others. It's about standing beside them when things fall apart." Victoria looked at Lily, peaceful in her hospital bed. "I built an empire, Daniel. But I don't have a single person who'd sit with me in a hospital waiting room at 2 a.m., and I'm starting to think that makes me poorer than I ever realized." The honesty hung between them, vulnerable and raw. Daniel didn't rush to fill the silence with reassurances or platitudes. He just nodded slowly, accepting her truth the same way he'd accepted losing his job that first night, with quiet dignity. "Well," he said finally, "you're here now. That's a start." "Yeah," Victoria agreed, something warm unfurling in her chest. "It's a start." They sat together through the small hours of the morning, watching Lily sleep and talking in quiet voices about everything and nothing. Daniel told her about Sarah, how they met, how she proposed to him instead of waiting for tradition, how she sang off-key in the shower and burned toast with impressive consistency. Victoria told him about her mother's gardens, about the art classes she'd never had time for, about the small ways she was starting to question everything she'd built her life around. As dawn broke over Queens, painting the hospital room in shades of gold, Victoria realized she'd spent the last 6 hours being more honest than she'd been in years. With Daniel. With herself. And when Lily woke up asking for breakfast, insisting that Miss Victoria had to stay because hospital food was super gross and they needed to order pizza instead, Victoria found herself laughing, really laughing, the kind that came from somewhere genuine and unguarded. It wasn't redemption. Not yet. But it was something better, possibility. The beginning of becoming someone worth sitting with at 2 a.m. The pizza never arrived, of course. Hospital regulations and all that. But Victoria had her assistant arrange for breakfast from a nearby cafe. Fresh fruit, yogurt parfaits, and chocolate croissants that made Lily's eyes go wide with delight. The little girl was discharged by noon, her fever broken, her energy already returning in that miraculous way children bounced back from illness. Victoria drove them home to Queens in her Tesla, navigating streets she'd never had reason to visit before. Daniel sat in the passenger seat with Lily dozing in the back, her stuffed rabbit clutched tight against her chest, and the silence between them was comfortable in a way that surprised them both. The apartment building was exactly what Victoria expected, a worn brick structure that had probably been built in the 70s, fire escapes zigzagging down the facade like scars. The neighborhood was working class, the kind of place where corner bodegas stayed open until midnight and neighbors actually knew each other's names. "You don't have to walk us up," Daniel said as Victoria pulled into a loading zone. "I'm already here." She turned off the engine. His apartment was on the 4th floor, accessible only by stairs that creaked with each step. The hallway smelled like someone's cooking, something with garlic and tomatoes that made Victoria's stomach rumble despite the croissants. Daniel fumbled with his keys, Lily heavy in his arms, and Victoria found herself reaching out to steady him when he swayed slightly from exhaustion. The apartment itself was small, a one-bedroom that Daniel had clearly converted to accommodate his daughter. Lily's bed was in what should have been the living room, separated from the rest of the space by a bookshelf and a curtain made of fabric printed with butterflies. Daniel's own sleeping area was just a pull-out couch near the kitchen. Everything was meticulously clean but undeniably threadbare. Furniture from secondhand stores, dishes that didn't match, a television that still had a VCR attached. But the walls were covered in Lily's artwork, crayon drawings of butterflies and rainbows, finger paintings of what might have been flowers or possibly aliens, construction paper cards that said, "I love you, Daddy," in wobbly letters. And there were photographs, dozens of them, chronicling Lily's short life. Most included a woman with kind eyes and dark hair, laughing in parks and playgrounds, holding a baby Lily with fierce tenderness. Sarah. Victoria stared at one photograph in particular, Sarah and Daniel on their wedding day, both of them young and radiant with the kind of happiness that didn't know yet how fragile it was. They were looking at each other instead of the camera, like the rest of the world had temporarily ceased to exist. "That was taken at City Hall," Daniel said quietly, having settled Lily onto her bed. "We couldn't afford a big wedding, so we went to the courthouse and then had pizza in Washington Square Park. Best day of my life. She's beautiful." "Yeah." His voice was rough. "She was." Victoria turned away from the photograph, suddenly feeling like an intruder. "I should go. Let you both rest." "Victoria." Daniel stopped her with a hand on her arm. "Thank you for last night, for this morning, for—" He gestured helplessly, encompassing everything he couldn't put into words. "You would have done the same for me," Victoria said, then paused. "Actually, you already did. When you called me out about the test, about what I'd become, that was a gift, even if I didn't recognize it at the time." They stood in the small entryway of his apartment, the space between them charged with something neither could name. Then Lily called out from behind her butterfly curtain, her voice drowsy but insistent. "Daddy, is Miss Victoria still here?" Daniel smiled. "Yeah, baby, she's still here." "Tell her thank you for staying at the hospital. Tell her she's nice." I think she heard you, Lily." "Good." A yawn. "Daddy, will you read me a story?" "Of course. I'll see myself out," Victoria said quickly. "Take care of your daughter." She left before the moment could become more than it was, taking the creaking stairs down to street level where her Tesla sat gleaming incongruously among the beat-up Hondas and old Toyotas. She drove back to Manhattan with her mind full of butterfly curtains and pizza wedding receptions, of love that flourished in cramped apartments with mismatched dishes. And she wondered, not for the first time, what she'd sacrificed in her pursuit of empire. The photograph appeared online on Tuesday. Victoria was in a breakfast meeting with her executive team when Margaret slipped into the conference room and placed a tablet in front of her, screen down. Victoria glanced up questioningly, but Margaret's face was carefully blank. Never a good sign. "Excuse me for a moment," Victoria said to the room, picking up the tablet and stepping into the hallway. She flipped the screen and felt her stomach drop. The photograph was grainy, clearly taken with a phone from a distance, but unmistakable. Victoria Hale carrying a small child, Lily, obviously, into Metropolitan General's emergency entrance. The timestamp read 12:34 a.m. Saturday. The headline on the gossip site was typically breathless. Billionaire CEO's secret daughter? Victoria Hale spotted at ER with mystery child. "How bad is it?" Victoria asked quietly. Margaret pulled out her own phone, already open to a different site. It's on 6 major gossip blogs, 2 business news sites, and trending on social media. The speculation ranges from you having a secret child to an affair with a married employee to a kidnapping scenario that I'm not even going to dignify with repetition. Victoria scrolled through the comments, each one more invasive than the last. Someone had already identified the hospital, the approximate time, even the make and model of her car. The internet's collective detective work was as impressive as it was horrifying. "The board?" Victoria asked, though she already knew. "Robert called 3 times before 8 a.m. I told him you were in meetings, but he's not going to wait much longer." Robert Chen, the board chairman, a man who'd worked with her father and never quite believed Victoria had earned her position rather than inherited it. He'd been looking for a reason to challenge her leadership since the day she took over as CEO. This would be like Christmas morning for him. "Set up a call for 2 p.m., Victoria said, handing back the tablet. "And get me legal. I want to know our options." Margaret hesitated. "Victoria, who is the child? If you're going to fight this, we need to control the narrative. The child is the 6-year-old daughter of one of my restaurant employees. She had an ear infection. I drove them to the hospital because her father had no one else to call." Victoria met Margaret's eyes. "That's the truth. Whether anyone believes it is another matter." "They won't," Margaret said bluntly, "not without proof. And even with proof, they'll twist it into something inappropriate. A boss getting too involved with staff, potential favoritism, questions about judgment." She was right, of course. The internet didn't care about truth. It cared about narrative, and the narrative of a lonely billionaire with a secret life was far more compelling than a simple act of human kindness. Victoria returned to her meeting, but she couldn't focus. Her executive team was presenting quarterly projections for the European expansion, but all she could think about was Daniel's apartment with its butterfly curtain and secondhand furniture. How this would affect him. How it would affect Lily. The 2 p.m. call with Robert went exactly as badly as she'd anticipated. "This is a disaster, Victoria." His voice crackled through the speakerphone sharp with barely concealed satisfaction. "Our stock is down 3% on speculation alone. We have investors calling for explanations. I have board members questioning your judgment." "My judgment in helping a sick child get medical care?" "Your judgment in getting personally involved with employees in a way that creates this kind of exposure." Robert's tone shifted to something more dangerous, reasonable concern. "You have to understand how this looks. A female CEO, unmarried, no children, suddenly appearing at a hospital in Queens with someone else's child in the middle of the night. The optics are terrible." "So, what are you suggesting?" "Distance yourself, immediately. Issue a statement through PR explaining it was a one-time misunderstanding, that you've ensured the family has proper resources, and that you've implemented policies to prevent this kind of boundary crossing in the future." Victoria gripped the edge of her desk. "Boundary crossing? I helped an employee whose daughter was sick. That's not a boundary crossing. That's basic human decency. It's a liability." Robert's patience was wearing thin. "And if you can't see that, then perhaps we need to discuss whether you're still the right person to lead this company." There it was. The threat she'd known was coming since the moment she saw that photograph. "Are you asking for my resignation, Robert?" "I'm asking you to fix this before it becomes necessary." A pause. "The board is meeting Thursday morning. I strongly suggest you have a plan by then." He disconnected before she could respond. Victoria sat alone in her office, watching the Manhattan skyline through her floor-to-ceiling windows. From up here, the city looked orderly, comprehensible. You couldn't see the struggling families in Queens' apartments, the hospital waiting rooms full of fear, The small acts of grace that happened in the margins. You couldn't see anything that mattered. Margaret appeared at her door. Daniel Carter is here. He doesn't have an appointment, but he says it's urgent. Of course he was. Victoria had been dreading this conversation since she saw the photograph. Send him in. Daniel entered looking like he hadn't slept, his eyes shadowed with exhaustion and something else. Anger, maybe, or betrayal. He held his phone in one hand, the offending photograph displayed on the screen. Tell me you didn't do this for publicity, he said without preamble. Victoria stood. I didn't even know there was a photographer, but you knew what it would look like. You knew what they'd say. He set the phone on her desk, the image glaring up at both of them. Lily saw this. One of her classmates' mothers sent it to the school group chat, asking if it was true that Lily was secretly your daughter. Do you know what that did to her, having other kids ask if her daddy is a liar? The words hit Victoria like physical blows. Daniel, I'm sorry. I never intended. What did you intend? He was pacing now, contained fury in every movement. When you showed up at the hospital, when you stayed all night, when you drove us home, what was that about? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like some kind of rich person's experiment. See how the poor people live. Feel good about yourself for a few hours and then go back to your tower. That's not fair. Fair? Daniel's laugh was bitter. You want to talk about fair? I've been getting calls all morning, reporters wanting comments, lawyers, your lawyers, I assume, asking me to sign NDAs. My neighbors looking at me like I've done something wrong. And Lily is confused and scared and asking questions I don't know how to answer. Victoria felt her own anger rising. I didn't take that photograph. I didn't create this situation, but you created the circumstances. You're the one who inserted herself into our lives. You're the one who couldn't just write a check and move on. He stopped pacing, facing her directly. I told you I didn't want to become someone who uses people like lab rats. But I'm realizing you don't just test people. You consume them. You pull them into your orbit, and when things get complicated, you have lawyers and PR teams to clean up the mess. Is that really what you think of me? I don't know what to think of you. Daniel's voice dropped, exhaustion replacing anger. Part of me wants to believe you're genuine, that you actually care. But then I remember you're the same person who fired me as a test. The same person who lives in a world so different from mine that we might as well be on different planets. And I think, maybe this was always going to end badly. Victoria moved around her desk, needing to close the distance between them. Listen to me. What happened at the hospital, that wasn't strategy or experiment or whatever you think it was. I stayed because you needed someone and I wanted to help. That's all. Nothing more complicated than that. But it is complicated, Victoria. He gestured at the window, at the city beyond. You can't just step into people's lives and step out when it gets messy. That's not how it works. Especially not with Lily. She's already asking when you're coming to visit again. She drew you a picture of butterflies. She thinks you're her friend. I am her friend. No. Daniel shook his head. Friends are equals. You're her father's boss. You're the person who could destroy our lives with a phone call. That's not friendship. That's power. The truth of it stung. Victoria wanted to argue, to defend herself, but she couldn't, because he was right. She'd been so focused on trying to change, on trying to be better, that she hadn't considered the fundamental inequality of their positions. What do you want me to do? She asked quietly. Daniel closed his eyes briefly, and when he opened them, something in his expression had hardened. My lawyers, the ones I can actually afford, say I should take a leave of absence. Distance myself from you and the company until this blows over. Your lawyers? Victoria felt cold spreading through her chest. Daniel, you don't need lawyers. I'm not. That's the problem, though, isn't it? You keep saying what you're not doing, but you never say what you are doing, and I can't afford to guess wrong. Not with Lily. He pulled an envelope from his jacket pocket and set it on her desk next to his phone. This is a formal request for family leave, 4 weeks, unpaid. I've already cleared it with James. You're leaving. I'm protecting my daughter. There's a difference. He moved toward the door, then paused. For what it's worth, I don't think you're a bad person, Victoria. I think you're a lonely person who doesn't know how to connect with people without it being a transaction. And that's sad. But it's not my responsibility to fix. He left, and Victoria stood in the silence of her office, staring at the envelope on her desk. Outside, the city continued its indifferent rhythm, Millions of lives intersecting and diverging, none of them aware or caring that her carefully constructed world was crumbling. Margaret appeared again because Margaret always knew when she was needed. The board meeting is set for Thursday at 9 a.m. They're calling it an emergency session. Of course they are. Victoria picked up the envelope, Daniel's formal leave request. Margaret, I need you to do something for me. Anything. Pull together everything we have on our employee assistance programs. Health benefits, childcare support, family leave policies. I want to see how we compare to industry standards. Margaret's eyebrows rose. Are you planning to announce new benefits? Because now might not be the best time for grand gestures that look like what? Like I actually care about the people who work for me? Victoria felt the anger she'd been suppressing finally break through. I've spent 15 years building this company on my father's principles. Testing people, keeping distance, treating employees like assets instead of human beings. And where's it gotten me? The board wants me gone. The man I was trying to help thinks I'm running some kind of social experiment, and I'm standing in an office that costs more than most people make in a year, completely alone. You're not alone, Margaret said gently. You have people who care about you. Do I? Or do I have people who work for me? There's a difference, Margaret. Daniel taught me that. Margaret was quiet for a moment. What are you going to do? It was the same question her mother had asked, the same question Victoria had been asking herself since that dinner on the 60th floor when she'd first seen something in Daniel Carter that she didn't understand. Dignity without pride, strength without cruelty, love without condition. I don't know yet, Victoria admitted, but I know I can't keep doing this. Building an empire at the cost of everything that makes life worth living. Thursday morning arrived too quickly. Victoria dressed with particular care, a navy suit that was professional without being aggressive, minimal jewelry, her hair pulled back in a style that suggested competence and control. Armor for a battle she wasn't sure she wanted to win. The boardroom was on the 66th floor, one level above her office. 15 seats around a table of polished walnut, windows overlooking the city like a reminder of everything at stake. The board members were already assembled when she arrived, 12 men and 3 women, all of them wealthy, all of them powerful, all of them looking at her with varying degrees of skepticism. Robert Chen sat at the head of the table, naturally. He'd probably been planning this coup since before the photograph even surfaced, just waiting for the right opportunity. Thank you all for coming, Victoria said, taking her seat at the opposite end. I know this is unusual timing. Unusual is one word for it, Robert said. Concerning is another. Victoria, we've all seen the media coverage, the speculation about your relationship with this employee, the questions about your judgment, the impact on our stock price. The stock has already recovered, Victoria pointed out. It was a brief dip based on gossip. This time, Robert leaned forward. But what about next time? What happens when there are more photographs, more questions? You've created a vulnerability that our competitors will exploit. I helped a sick child. That's not a vulnerability. That's basic humanity. It's a distraction, another board member interjected. Thomas Wright, a man who'd made his fortune in private equity by buying struggling companies and stripping them for parts. Your job is to run Hale Industries, not play social worker to your staff. Victoria felt her jaw tighten. And if I can't do both? If being an effective CEO means ignoring the actual people who make this company function? Then, yes, Thomas said bluntly, this is business, not a charity. Actually, Victoria said, pulling out the folder Margaret had prepared, I've been reviewing our employment policies, and I've discovered something interesting. We rank in the bottom 20% of hospitality companies for employee benefits. Our health insurance has a $5,000 deductible. We offer 0 paid parental leave. Our child care assistance program doesn't exist. Robert's expression hardened. Those are competitive standards for our industry. Competitive for profit margins, not competitive for actually supporting the people who work for us. Victoria opened the folder. I ran some numbers. If we increased our health insurance coverage, added 2 weeks of paid parental leave, and created a child care assistance program, it would cost us approximately $8 million annually. $8 million? Thomas sputtered. That's insane. Is it? We spent $12 million on office renovations last year, $9 million on executive bonuses, $6 million on that disastrous Super Bowl ad that Robert insisted on. Victoria met his eyes. We have the money. We've just chosen to spend it on things that don't matter. Things that don't matter? Robert's voice rose. Those renovations improved our company image. Those bonuses retained top talent. That advertising increased brand awareness. And none of it means anything if we're built on the backs of people who can't afford to take their sick children to the hospital. Victoria stood, unable to sit through this anymore. I've been thinking a lot about my father lately, about the lessons he taught me, and I'm realizing that he was wrong about almost everything that mattered. The room went silent. Criticizing Gerald Hale in this boardroom was like blasphemy in church. He taught me that strength meant emotional distance, Victoria continued, that leadership meant making hard choices without flinching, that the only thing that mattered was winning. And I believed him. I built this company on those principles. But you know what I've learned in the past few weeks? What? Robert's tone was dangerous. That I've been confusing damage for strength. That all those hard choices without flinching just meant I'd stopped feeling anything at all. That winning doesn't mean much when you're completely alone at the finish line. Victoria looked around the table, meeting each board member's eyes. My father died with an empire and nobody who truly knew him. I'm 42 years old and I'm heading down the exact same path and I'm not doing it anymore. What exactly are you saying? Thomas demanded. Victoria took a breath, making a decision that she'd been circling since Daniel walked out of her office 3 days ago. I'm saying that I'm implementing these benefit changes regardless of your approval. I'm saying that I'm restructuring our company culture to prioritize people over profit margins. And I'm saying that if you don't like it, you can accept my resignation. The room erupted. Multiple board members talking over each other, Robert calling for order, someone demanding a vote. Victoria stood in the eye of the storm, feeling strangely calm. Finally, Robert's voice cut through the chaos. Everyone quiet! He turned to Victoria, his expression hard as granite. You're really willing to give up everything your father built over some misguided crusade for employee benefits? My father built an empire that made people like us wealthy while treating everyone else as expendable. If that's what I'm giving up, then yes, I'm willing. Victoria placed her hands on the table. But I'm not asking your permission. I'm telling you what's happening. You can vote me out if you want. But these changes are going into effect regardless of who's sitting in the CEO chair. You can't make unilateral decisions like that, Thomas protested. Watch me. Victoria pulled out another document, one she'd had legal prepare over the past 2 days. I own 41% of Hale Industries stock. My mother owns another 12%, and she's already signed a proxy giving me her votes. That's 53%, gentlemen. A controlling majority. So yes, I absolutely can make these decisions unilaterally. Robert's face had gone red. Your mother hasn't been involved in company decisions since the divorce. I called her. We talked. She agrees that it's time Hale Industries started caring about more than just bottom lines. Victoria gathered her papers. The changes go into effect next quarter. You'll all receive detailed proposals by end of week. If anyone wants to resign from the board in protest, I'll accept your resignation with gratitude. She walked out before anyone could respond, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might break through her ribs. She'd just bet everything, her position, her reputation, the empire she'd spent 15 years building, on the belief that there was a better way to do this. She hoped to God she was right. Margaret was waiting outside the boardroom, her expression carefully neutral. How did it go? Either very well or catastrophically. Hard to say yet. Victoria kept walking toward the elevator. Cancel the rest of my meetings today. I need to do something. What? Victoria pressed the button for the ground floor. Something I should have done 3 days ago. The subway to Queens was crowded with afternoon commuters, and Victoria Hale had never felt more out of place in her life. She sat wedged between a woman reading a romance novel and a teenager with headphones, her designer suit drawing curious stares. She'd taken the subway exactly 3 times since moving to Manhattan, all of them for photo opportunities during her first year as CEO. This time, nobody was taking photographs. Nobody cared. It was strangely liberating. Daniel's apartment building looked shabbier in the afternoon light, the brick facade weathered and worn. Victoria climbed the 4 flights of stairs, her heels echoing in the stairwell, and knocked on apartment 4B before she could second-guess herself. Mrs. Chen answered, a small woman in her 60s with suspicious eyes. Yes? I'm looking for Daniel Carter. I know who you are. Mrs. Chen's expression hardened. You're the one who got him in trouble. I'm the one trying to make it right. Victoria held up her hands, showing she wasn't a threat. Is he here? He's at the park with Lily, 2 blocks north on the corner. Mrs. Chen started to close the door, then paused. That little girl has been through enough. Whatever game you're playing, leave her out of it. It's not a game, Victoria said quietly. Not anymore. She found them at the park, a small square of green wedged between apartment buildings. Daniel was pushing Lily on a swing, his face more relaxed than she'd seen it in weeks. Lily's laughter rang out, pure and uncomplicated, and something in Victoria's chest twisted painfully. This was what she'd been missing, the simple joy of being present for someone you loved. Daniel saw her first. His expression shuddered immediately, and he caught the swing to slow it down. Lily, why don't you go play on the slide for a few minutes? But Daddy, I need to talk to Miss Victoria. Go on. Lily scampered off, her butterfly boots flashing in the sunlight, and Daniel turned to face Victoria with his arms crossed. I thought I made myself clear, he said. You did, but I needed to tell you something. Victoria moved closer, acutely aware of the distance between them, not just physical, but everything it represented. I talked to the board this morning. And I told them I'm implementing major changes to our employee benefits. Better health care, parental leave, childcare assistance. The things that should have existed all along. Daniel's expression didn't change. Congratulations. I'm sure your PR team will love that. This isn't PR, Daniel. This is me finally understanding what you've been trying to teach me. Victoria took a breath. You were right. About everything. About me using people like experiments. About confusing power with connection. About being lonely and not knowing how to fix it. So what? You're implementing new benefits to assuage your guilt? I'm implementing new benefits because it's the right thing to do. Because people like you shouldn't have to choose between caring for your daughter and paying rent. Because I've built an empire on the assumption that profit matters more than people, and I was wrong. She looked toward the playground where Lily was climbing the slide ladder. Your daughter taught me that. You taught me that. And I'm grateful, even if it cost me everything. Cost you everything? Daniel's laugh was sharp. You're still a billionaire, Victoria. You still have your company. For now, half my board wants me gone. The other half thinks I've lost my mind. There's a good chance I'll be voted out by next quarter. Victoria met his eyes. But at least I'll know I tried to do something that mattered. For a long moment, they stood in silence, the sounds of the playground washing over them. Finally, Daniel spoke, his voice softer. Why are you really here, Victoria? Because I owe you an apology. A real one, not just words. Victoria felt tears threatening. When was the last time she'd cried? I inserted myself into your life without understanding the consequences. I made everything more complicated for you and Lily, and I'm sorry, truly sorry. And the leave of absence? Denied. You can come back whenever you're ready, if you're ready, or you can choose not to come back at all. Either way, you'll receive full pay for the next month as compensation for what I put you through. Victoria pulled an envelope from her bag. And this is a formal letter guaranteeing your spot in the development program, with the childcare stipend starting immediately, regardless of whether you work for Hale Industries or not. Daniel took the envelope slowly, not opening it. Why would you do that if I quit? Because the program was never about binding you to my company. It was about recognizing talent and helping it flourish. Where that talent ends up is your choice. Victoria smiled sadly. I'm learning that love, real love, the kind you have for Lily, means letting people go when that's what they need, even when it hurts. Miss Victoria! They both turned to see Lily running toward them, her face lit with excitement. You came back! Daddy said you were busy, but I knew you'd come visit. She crashed into Victoria's legs with the full force of 6-year-old enthusiasm, and Victoria found herself kneeling down, eye level with this small person who'd somehow changed everything. Hi, Lily. I drew you a picture. It's butterflies, your favorite. I don't think I ever told you butterflies were my favorite, Victoria said gently. I know, but they should be. They're beautiful, and they can fly anywhere they want. Lily's logic was irrefutable. Do you want to see me go down the slide? Victoria glanced up at Daniel, who was watching them with an expression she couldn't read. He gave a small nod. I would love to see you go down the slide, Victoria said. She spent the next hour at that playground in Queens, watching Lily play and talking with Daniel about everything and nothing. They didn't resolve anything. Too much had happened for easy resolutions. But they sat on a bench together while Lily made friends with other children, and Victoria felt something shift inside her. This was real. This mattered. Not board meetings or stock prices or empire building, but this, being present for people who'd somehow become important to her. As the sun started to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold, Lily returned to claim her father's hand. "Can Miss Victoria have dinner with us?" she asked hopefully. Daniel looked at Victoria, the question in his eyes. She could see him weighing it, the risk, the complication, the fundamental inequality between them. "I'd like that," Victoria said, "if it's okay with your dad." "It's okay," Daniel said finally. "Mrs. Chen is making her famous dumplings. There's always extra." So Victoria Hale, billionaire CEO, climbed 4 flights of creaking stairs to a tiny apartment in Queens and had dinner with a family that wasn't hers. The dumplings were indeed famous for good reason. The conversation was easy, and Lily insisted on showing Victoria every single one of her drawings, explaining the deep significance of each crayon color choice. And when she finally left, stepping out into the cool evening air, Victoria realized she'd spent the last 3 hours being happier than she'd been in years. She didn't know if the board would fire her, didn't know if her new policies would work, or if she'd destroyed her father's legacy for nothing. Didn't know if whatever was developing between her and Daniel would survive the fundamental imbalance of their positions. But she knew she'd chosen right. Finally, after 42 years of choosing power over people, empire over connection, she'd chosen right. It was a start. The dumpling dinner became a memory Victoria carried through the storm that followed. And it was a storm. The business press picked up on the board meeting within hours, leaked, no doubt, by Robert or one of his allies. The headlines were predictably dramatic. Hale Industries CEO risks empire for employee benefits. Victoria Hale's radical restructuring sparks board revolt. Billionaire's charity crusade threatens shareholder value. The commentary was worse. Financial analysts questioned her competence. Business school professors used her as a case study in emotional decision-making. One particularly vicious editorial suggested she was having a breakdown, that grief over her father's death had finally caught up with her and clouded her judgment. Victoria read every word, felt every cut, and kept moving forward anyway. The employee benefits package was announced the following Monday. The response from staff was immediate and overwhelming. Tears in the break rooms. Thank you emails flooding her inbox. Workers who'd never spoken to her before stopping her in hallways to express gratitude. One woman from housekeeping, a single mother of 3, hugged Victoria in the elevator and whispered, "You just changed my life." That moment, more than any board approval or stock price, told Victoria she'd made the right choice. But the cost was mounting. By Wednesday, 3 board members had resigned in protest. The stock had dropped 8%. Robert was calling emergency shareholder meetings and circulating a petition to remove Victoria as CEO. The lawyers were earning their substantial fees, preparing for what looked increasingly like a corporate coup. Margaret brought coffee and concern in equal measure, appearing at Victoria's door late Thursday evening when most of the building had emptied out. "You should go home," Margaret said, setting down the cup. "You've been here for 16 hours. I've been here for longer than that before." "Yes, but usually you're building something, not watching it fall apart." Margaret sat down across from her. "Victoria, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest. Are you doing this because it's right or because of Daniel Carter?" Victoria looked up sharply. "What kind of question is that?" "The kind your board is going to ask when they try to remove you. They're already building a narrative that you've become emotionally compromised, that your judgment is clouded by an inappropriate attachment to an employee." Margaret's expression was sympathetic but firm. "I've worked for you for 8 years. I've never seen you act on impulse. So I'm asking, is this impulse or evolution?" The question deserved consideration. Victoria set down her pen and looked out at the Manhattan skyline, the city lights stretching to every horizon. 6 weeks ago, I would have called this impulse, she admitted. I would have looked at the numbers and made the calculation that $8 million in benefits wasn't worth the board revolt. I would have protected the empire at all costs. She turned back to Margaret. "But Daniel taught me something. He showed me that there are people in this building, people I see every day, who are one medical emergency away from losing everything. And I've been so focused on quarterly earnings that I never even noticed. So this is about guilt. No, guilt would be writing checks and moving on. This is about actually changing how we operate, about building a company that doesn't require people to sacrifice their humanity for a paycheck. Victoria pulled up a file on her computer. Look at this. Our turnover rate in service positions is 68% annually. Do you know how much it costs to constantly recruit and train new staff? Margaret leaned forward. How much? $14 million last year alone. We're spending more on turnover than these benefits would cost, and we're creating a culture where employees feel expendable. Victoria shook her head. My father built this company on the belief that people were replaceable. I'm trying to build something where people matter more than profit margins. Maybe that's radical. Maybe it'll fail. But at least it's honest. Margaret was quiet for a long moment. Then she smiled, a real smile, not the professional mask she usually wore. For what it's worth, I think you're doing the right thing, even if it costs you everything. Thank you, Margaret. That actually means a lot. Good. Now go home. You look like death warmed over, and if you're going into battle with Robert Chen, you need to at least look like you're winning. Victoria laughed despite everything and finally shut down her computer. The penthouse felt especially empty that night, her footsteps echoing on marble floors, the silence pressing in from all sides. She poured herself exactly one glass of wine and stood at the window, watching the city breathe below her. Her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Hi, Miss Victoria. This is Daniel. Lily wanted me to send you this. Below was a photo of a crayon drawing, butterflies in every color imaginable, flying above what looked like tall buildings. At the bottom, in wobbly letters, for Miss Victoria, love, Lily. Victoria felt something crack in her chest. She saved the photo and sent back a simple reply. Thank you. Tell Lily it's beautiful. 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Finally, she wants to know if you can come to her school art show next Friday. No pressure. I know you're busy. Victoria looked at her calendar. Next Friday was the shareholder meeting where Robert would almost certainly move to remove her as CEO. It was scheduled for 2 p.m. The art show would probably be in the evening. She typed back, "What time?" 6 p.m., PS 114 in Queens. But really no pressure. I know it's a lot to ask. I'll be there, Victoria wrote, then added, "Tell Lily I wouldn't miss it." The response came quickly. She's doing her happy dance. Fair warning, it involves a lot of spinning. Victoria smiled, imagining it. Then Daniel sent one more message. How are you holding up? I've been seeing the news. She stared at the question for a long time. When was the last time someone had asked her that and actually wanted to know the answer? Honestly, I'm terrified, but also more certain than I've ever been. That sounds about right, Daniel replied. That's what real change feels like. Scary and right at the same time. They texted back and forth for another 20 minutes. Nothing profound, just the small exchanges of people getting to know each other. Daniel told her about Lily's current obsession with becoming a veterinarian, specifically for butterflies. Victoria told him about Margaret's concern that she looked like death warmed over. It was normal, comfortable. And when Victoria finally went to bed, she felt less alone than she had in years. The shareholder meeting arrived with the inevitability of a storm. Victoria dressed for war, a sharp black suit, her mother's pearl earrings for courage, heels that added 3 inches to her height. She needed every advantage she could get. Robert had spent the past week rallying support, calling in favors, building his coalition. The vote would be close. Margaret met her outside the conference center they'd rented for the occasion. The crowd was too large for the boardroom. Full house, she reported. Media is being kept outside, but there are cameras everywhere. Robert gave an interview this morning calling your policies fiscally irresponsible emotional indulgence. Of course he did. Victoria straightened her shoulders. Let's do this. The conference room was packed with shareholders, board members, and senior executives. The air was thick with tension and expensive cologne. Robert stood near the front, holding court with a cluster of supporters, looking supremely confident. He saw Victoria enter, and his smile was predatory. Victoria, so glad you could make it to your own removal hearing. It's not a removal hearing, Robert. It's a shareholder meeting. She moved past him to take her seat at the head table. There's a difference. Is there? Because I have proxies representing 48% of shares ready to vote for your removal. He leaned in, lowering his voice. You can make this easy or hard. Resign voluntarily, and we'll give you a generous severance. Fight it, and we'll make this very public and very ugly. Victoria met his eyes. When have I ever made anything easy? The meeting was called to order. The first hour was procedural, quarterly reports, standard updates, the mundane machinery of corporate governance. But everyone in the room knew what was coming. The tension built like pressure before a storm. Finally, Robert stood to address the assembly. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm calling for a vote of no confidence in our current CEO. His voice carried authority, the weight of decades in business. Victoria Hale has served this company for 15 years, but her recent decisions, reckless restructuring, inappropriate personal involvement with employees, policies that prioritize sentiment over shareholders, have demonstrated that she is no longer fit to lead Hale Industries. Murmurs rippled through the room. Victoria kept her expression neutral. Robert continued, building his case with the precision of a prosecutor. He cited the stock decline, the board resignations, the radical departure from Gerald Hale's proven business model. He painted Victoria as emotionally unstable, clouded by inappropriate attachments, sacrificing shareholder value for personal crusades. It was a masterful performance. By the time he finished, even Victoria could feel the room turning against her. Ms. Hale, the moderator said, you have the floor to respond. Victoria stood, feeling every eye in the room on her. This was it, her chance to defend herself, to save her position, to protect the empire her father built. She could back down now, promise to rescind the benefits package, return to business as usual. She'd keep her job, keep her power, keep everything exactly as it was, or she could tell the truth. Robert is right about several things, Victoria began, and she heard the shocked intake of breath from Margaret's direction. The stock has declined. Board members have resigned. I have departed significantly from my father's business model. She paused, letting the admission settle. What he's wrong about is why those things happened and whether they matter. She pulled out a sheet of paper, not prepared remarks, just notes she'd scribbled that morning. My father, Gerald Hale, built this company from nothing. He was brilliant, ruthless, and utterly dedicated to success at any cost. He taught me that people were assets to be managed, that emotion was weakness, that the only thing that mattered was winning. Victoria's voice was steady, and I believed him. For 15 years, I ran this company exactly the way he taught me. I tested employees to see who would break. I kept emotional distance from everyone. I made decisions based purely on profit without considering the human cost. And you know what that got me? She looked around the room. An empire I was afraid to lose and a life so empty that I didn't even realize how lonely I was. Until a single father working in my restaurant showed me what I'd become. This is irrelevant, Robert started, but Victoria cut him off. It's completely relevant, because Daniel Carter, yes, the employee whose daughter I took to the hospital, the one Robert thinks proves my incompetence, he showed me something I'd forgotten. He showed me that there are people in this building who work multiple shifts to afford insulin for their children. People who skip meals so their kids can eat. People who can't afford to take a sick day because our health insurance doesn't cover the basics. Her voice grew stronger. We've been so focused on quarterly earnings that we've ignored the fact that our employees are struggling. And that's not just morally wrong, it's bad business. She pulled up a presentation on the screen behind her, data Margaret had helped compile over the past week. These are our turnover rates by department. Service staff, 68% annually. Housekeeping, 72%. Kitchen staff, 65%. We're hemorrhaging employees because we treat them as expendable. And every time someone leaves, it costs us an average of $15,000 to recruit, hire, and train their replacement. The numbers filled the screen, impossible to ignore. Now look at these projections, Victoria continued. If we implement the benefits package Robert calls fiscally irresponsible, our turnover rate should drop by approximately 40% based on industry benchmarks. That means we'll save roughly $9 million in recruitment and training costs. The benefits package costs $8 million. We actually come out ahead. The room went quiet. She had their attention now. But even if we didn't come out ahead financially, it would still be the right thing to do. Because companies aren't just profit engines. They're communities. They're collections of human beings spending the majority of their waking hours together, creating value together, building something together. And if we can't take care of those people, if we can't ensure they have basic health care and the ability to care for their families, then what are we actually building? Just another machine that grinds people up and spits them out? Victoria turned to face Robert directly. You said I'm departing from my father's model. You're absolutely right, because my father's model created an empire at the cost of everything that makes life worth living. He died surrounded by people who respected him and feared him, but not a single person who truly knew him, not even his own daughter. Her voice cracked slightly. I don't want that legacy. I don't want to build something that requires people to sacrifice their humanity for a paycheck. So yes, I'm changing things. And if that costs me this position, then at least I'll know I tried to do something that mattered. The silence that followed was absolute. Victoria stood at the front of the room, her heart pounding, waiting for judgment. Finally, a woman stood up in the back. Eleanor Santos, a major shareholder who'd inherited her position from her late husband. She was in her 70s, sharp as a knife, and rarely spoke at these meetings. I have a question for Mr. Chen, Eleanor said, her voice carrying easily across the room. Robert straightened. Of course. In all your discussion of fiscal responsibility and shareholder value, you mentioned the stock decline, but you didn't mention that we've also seen a 23% increase in positive media coverage in the past week, or that customer satisfaction scores are up 15%, or that we've had a 300% increase in job applications. Eleanor's eyes were steel. It seems to me that Ms. Hale's radical policies are actually quite popular with everyone except the board members who profit from keeping things exactly as they are. Robert's face flushed. Those are short-term metrics that don't reflect. Don't patronize me, Robert. I've been investing longer than you've been alive. Eleanor looked around the room. I knew Gerald Hale. He was brilliant and completely miserable. He built an empire and died alone. If his daughter wants to try building something different, something that doesn't require human sacrifice at the altar of quarterly earnings, then I'm willing to give her that chance. Another shareholder stood, then another. The tide was turning. Victoria could feel it, though she didn't dare let herself hope yet. The debate raged for another hour. Arguments for and against, questions about implementation timelines, concerns about precedent. Robert fought hard, calling in every favor, making every argument, but the momentum had shifted. When the vote was finally called, Victoria closed her eyes. She heard the electronic chimes as votes were registered, the rustle of movement, the whispered conversations. The moderator's voice cut through. The votes have been tallied. For removal of Victoria Hale as CEO, 42%. Against removal, 58%. The motion fails. Victoria exhaled, feeling her knees go weak. She'd won. Barely, but she'd won. Robert stood abruptly, his face a mask of barely controlled fury. This is a mistake. You'll regret this. He gathered his papers. I'm resigning from the board effective immediately, and I'm not the only one. He stormed out, followed by two of his closest allies. Victoria watched them go and felt only relief. The meeting dissolved into chaos. Shareholders approaching Victoria with congratulations or concerns, media trying to push their way in, Margaret appearing at her elbow with a schedule of immediate follow-ups needed. Victoria handled it all with automatic precision, but her mind was elsewhere. She'd done it. She'd stood up to the board, defended her principles, and survived. But survival wasn't the same as victory. She still had to actually implement these policies, prove they could work, rebuild the board with people who shared her vision. The real work was just beginning. It was nearly 7 p.m. by the time she escaped the conference center. Margaret had handled the press, scheduled follow-up meetings, and coordinated with legal about the board resignations. Victoria sat in the back of her car, suddenly exhausted when she remembered. Lily's art show, 6 p.m. She'd missed it. Turn around, she told her driver. Queens, PS 114. Miss Hale, it's after 7. The event is probably... Just drive. Please. The school was mostly dark when they arrived, just a few lit windows suggesting stragglers. Victoria hurried inside, her heels clicking on linoleum floors, following signs to the auditorium. The doors were open, the space nearly empty except for a custodian breaking down folding chairs. And in the corner, sitting on the floor surrounded by artwork, were Daniel and Lily. Lily saw her first. "Miss Victoria, you came." "I'm so sorry I'm late. I had this meeting, and it ran long, and I tried to get here, but it's okay." Lily scrambled up, running over with a large piece of construction paper. "We waited for you. Daddy said you'd come if you could." Victoria looked over Lily's head at Daniel, who shrugged with a small smile. She insisted, said Miss Victoria doesn't break promises. "I don't," Victoria said, kneeling down to Lily's level. "Show me your art." The piece was a butterfly garden made from tissue paper, glitter, and what appeared to be an entire bottle of glue. It was chaotic and beautiful and absolutely perfect. "This is magnificent," Victoria said honestly. "Did you make this all by yourself?" "Mostly. My teacher helped with the cutting because scissors are still hard. But I did all the gluing and glitter." Lily pointed proudly at a particularly glittery section. "See? That's the special butterfly. It's gold because gold is the best color." "Gold is an excellent choice." Victoria stood, still holding the artwork carefully. "I'm really sorry I missed the show, Lily." "It's okay. Daddy said you had important work stuff. Did you save the world?" Victoria laughed, surprising herself. "I don't know about the world, but maybe I saved something." "That's good. Daddy says saving things is important. He saved me when Mommy died." Lily said it matter-of-factly, the way children do when they've processed trauma into simple truth. "Now, we save each other." The words hit Victoria square in the chest. She looked at Daniel, who was carefully packing up other pieces of artwork, his expression unreadable. The custodian cleared his throat. "Folks, I need to lock up." "Of course. We're leaving." Daniel helped Lily into her coat, gathered the armload of artwork. "Come on, baby, let's go home." "Can Miss Victoria come with us?" Lily asked hopefully. "Miss Victoria probably has more important work to do." "Actually," Victoria interrupted, "I could use some company, if that's okay." Daniel met her eyes, and something passed between them. Understanding, maybe, or just the acknowledgement of connection neither quite knew how to name. "Pizza?" he offered. "Pizza sounds perfect." They walked through Queens in the cool evening air, Lily between them holding both their hands and chattering about her classmates' artwork. Victoria couldn't remember the last time she'd done something this simple. Just walked through a neighborhood with people she cared about, no agenda beyond being together. The pizza place was a hole-in-the-wall joint with plastic tablecloths and a TV playing sports in the corner. Lily insisted Victoria try the slice with extra cheese, proclaimed it the best pizza in the whole universe, and proceeded to get sauce on her nose. "So," Daniel said once Lily was distracted by coloring on her paper placemat, "you survived." "Barely. The vote was close. But you won. For now." 3 board members resigned. "I still have to actually implement all these policies and prove they work." Victoria took a bite of pizza. It really was remarkably good. "It's going to be a fight. Maybe one I'll lose eventually." "But you're fighting anyway." "Yeah, I'm fighting anyway." She looked at him. "Because you were right. About all of it. About me being lonely and not knowing how to connect without it being transactional. About damage versus strength. About choosing what matters over what's easy." Daniel was quiet for a moment, spinning his water glass. "You know what I realized this week? When all that stuff was happening, the photos, the media, having to explain to Lily why strangers were asking questions about us?" "What?" "I realized I was angry at you for the wrong reasons. I was angry because you complicated my life. But my life was already complicated. I was just scared of anything that might make it more so." He met her eyes. "You took a risk by getting involved with us, by caring when it would have been easier not to. And instead of appreciating that, I punished you for it. You had every right to be angry, maybe. But I think I was also scared, because it's easier to keep everyone at arm's length than to let someone in who might actually matter." Daniel smiled wryly. "Turns out I'm not so different from you, just poorer." Victoria laughed, and it felt good. "So what now?" "Now?" Daniel glanced at Lily, who was showing her artwork to the waitress. "Now we figure it out as we go. No more tests. No more power dynamics. Just 2 people trying to be better than they were." "And Lily?" "Lily is a package deal. Always." His voice was firm. "If you're in for all of it. The good and the complicated, and the fact that there's a 6-year-old who thinks you hung the moon. Victoria looked at Lily, covered in pizza sauce and glitter, explaining with great seriousness why butterflies needed more appreciation. And she felt something she'd thought she'd lost the capacity for. Hope. I'm in, she said quietly, for all of it. Daniel's smile was genuine, reaching his eyes for the first time since this whole thing started. Good. Fair warning, though, you're about to be drafted into tea party duty. Lily's been planning one for weeks. I've negotiated billion-dollar deals. I think I can handle a tea party. You say that now. Wait until you meet Mr. Whiskers. He has very strong opinions about proper tea etiquette. They finished their pizza and walked back to Daniel's apartment building, Lily falling asleep on her father's shoulder halfway there. Victoria helped carry the artwork up the 4 flights of stairs, careful not to smudge any of the glitter butterflies. At the door, Daniel shifted Lily's weight to unlock it, then paused. Thank you for coming tonight, for not breaking your promise to her. I wouldn't, Victoria said. Not to her, not anymore. He smiled. I know, that's why we waited. Victoria left them there, Daniel carrying his sleeping daughter inside, the apartment warm with light and laughter and the evidence of love in every crayon drawing on the walls. She took the subway back to Manhattan, her suit jacket dotted with glitter, her expensive heels hurting her feet, and felt more at peace than she had in years. She'd won the vote, kept her company, defended her principles. But more than that, she'd found something her father never had, people worth fighting for. And that, Victoria was learning, made all the difference. When she finally crawled into bed that night, her phone buzzed one last time. A message from Daniel. Lily wanted me to tell you good night. Also, tea party is Sunday at 2 p.m. Formal attire required, meaning the fanciest butterfly wings you can find. Victoria smiled in the darkness and typed back, I'll see what I can do. She fell asleep thinking about butterflies and pizza and the way Lily's laughter sounded like wind chimes. And for the first time in longer than she could remember, she dreamed about something other than empire. She dreamed about home. Victoria spent Saturday morning doing something she hadn't done in over a decade, shopping for butterfly wings. The costume store in Brooklyn was cramped and overwhelming, filled with sequins and feathers and every possible iteration of childhood fantasy. She stood in the aisle, a billionaire CEO surrounded by tutus and superhero capes, trying to decide between iridescent purple wings and ones that sparkled gold. The gold ones, said a voice behind her. Victoria turned to find a young mother with a toddler on her hip. Kids always love the sparkly ones. Thank you. Victoria reached for the gold wings, then paused. Actually, can I ask you something? If you were 6 years old, which would you want? The woman considered this seriously. Both. 6-year-olds have no concept of restraint when it comes to sparkle. So Victoria bought both sets of wings, along with a tiny crown that seemed appropriately theatrical for a formal tea party. The cashier rang her up without recognition, just another customer buying costume accessories, and Victoria felt oddly grateful for the anonymity. Sunday arrived with the kind of spring weather that made New York feel almost manageable, sunshine without humidity, a breeze that didn't cut to the bone. Victoria dressed carefully in what she hoped was tea party-appropriate attire. A simple blue dress, comfortable flats, minimal jewelry. She packed the butterfly wings in a shopping bag and took the subway to Queens. Mrs. Chen answered Daniel's door this time, her expression warming slightly when she saw Victoria. You're early, she observed. I wanted to make sure I wasn't late again. Victoria held up the bag. Is Lily ready? She's been ready since yesterday. Come in. The apartment had been transformed into a tea party wonderland. A small table was set up near the window, covered in a pink tablecloth with plastic teacups and plates. Stuffed animals occupied 3 of the 5 chairs. Mr. Whiskers the rabbit, a worn teddy bear, and a giraffe missing one eye. Lily stood in the center of it all wearing a princess dress that was slightly too big, her hair decorated with what appeared to be every hair clip she owned. Miss Victoria! She launched herself forward, then stopped abruptly. Wait, I have to be proper. It's a formal tea party. She executed a wobbly curtsy that was so earnest it made Victoria's chest tight. Thank you for inviting me, Victoria said, matching Lily's formal tone. I brought something for you. Lily's eyes went wide as Victoria pulled out the butterfly wings. Both kinds. I couldn't decide which was better, so I got both. A young woman at the store told me 6-year-olds don't believe in restraint when it comes to sparkle. She's very smart. Lily carefully put on the gold wings, then immediately wanted to switch to the purple ones, then decided she needed to wear both at the same time. Daniel emerged from the kitchen laughing, wearing a tie that had clearly been selected by his daughter. It was covered in cartoon cats. Mr. Whiskers insisted, he explained, gesturing at the tie. Apparently, regular ties aren't formal enough for his standards. They settled around the tiny table, Victoria folding her legs awkwardly to fit, Daniel pouring imaginary tea with great ceremony. Lily explained the rules. Everyone had to use their pinky fingers, compliments to the chef were mandatory, and any discussion of vegetables was strictly forbidden. What about fruit? Victoria asked. Lily considered this. Fruit is okay, but only the ones that don't taste like vegetables pretending to be fruit. What fruits taste like vegetables pretending to be fruit? Tomatoes. Lily's expression was deadly serious. They're lying, and everyone knows it. The tea party progressed with the particular chaos that only a 6-year-old could orchestrate. Mr. Whiskers apparently had strong opinions about proper napkin placement. The teddy bear needed constant reassurance that the imaginary cookies were chocolate chip. The giraffe was simply happy to be included despite his missing eye. And Victoria found herself laughing, really laughing, the kind that came from somewhere genuine and unguarded. Daniel caught her eye across the table and smiled, and something warm unfurled in Victoria's chest. This was what she'd been missing. Not the trappings of success or the validation of victory, but this simple joy of being present with people who mattered. After tea, Lily insisted on a fashion show where everyone had to model their butterfly wings. Mrs. Chen was drafted as the audience, clapping politely while Daniel and Victoria paraded around the small apartment with various degrees of dignity. Lily was the star, naturally, pirouetting and declaring herself the queen of all butterflies. As the afternoon stretched into evening, Mrs. Chen left to visit her own family. Lily eventually crashed on the couch mid-sentence, the wings askew, exhausted from the excitement. Daniel carefully removed the costume pieces and covered her with a blanket. She's going to sleep for 12 hours, he said quietly, joining Victoria at the window. Tea parties always knock her out. They stood side by side, watching the street below. A family was returning from the park, kids racing ahead while parents followed with strollers. An elderly man was walking a dog so small it looked more like a mobile dust mop. Life happening in all its ordinary, beautiful complexity. I got offered a spot on the new board, Victoria said suddenly. Daniel looked at her. What? After Robert resigned, we needed to fill seats. Eleanor Santos suggested I should take one of them, that having the CEO on the board would provide better alignment. Victoria traced a pattern on the window glass. I said no. Why? Because I realized something during that shareholder meeting. I've spent my entire adult life accumulating power, positions and titles and control. But power without purpose is just weight, and I'm tired of carrying it alone. She turned to face him. So I'm restructuring, bringing in new board members who actually care about employees, delegating more to my executive team, creating space for other people to lead. That sounds terrifying for someone who's spent years controlling everything. It is, Victoria smiled. But so was standing up to Robert. So was implementing policies that might cost me my job. Terrifying seems to be my new normal. Daniel moved closer, close enough that she could see the gold flecks in his eyes, the tiny scar above his eyebrow. For what it's worth, I think you're doing the right thing. Even though it's messy and complicated and there's a good chance some of it will fail, especially because of that. Perfect systems don't need people, messy ones do. He reached out, hesitated, then gently tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. You're learning to need people, Victoria. That's not weakness. That's courage. The moment stretched between them, charged with possibility. Victoria could feel her heart pounding, could see Daniel's pulse jumping in his throat. The space between them was suddenly too much and not enough all at once. Daniel, she whispered, I don't know how to do this. Do what? This. Whatever this is, I've never... She gestured helplessly between them. I don't know the rules. I don't know how to be with someone when it's not about power or transactions or strategy. There are no rules, Daniel said softly. Or maybe the only rule is being honest. about what you want, about what scares you, about what matters. What if what I want is incompatible with what you need? What if I mess this up like I mess everything else up? Then we'll figure it out together. That's what people do when they care about each other. Daniel took her hand, his calloused fingers gentle against hers. I'm not asking for perfect, Victoria. I'm just asking for real. Real, she repeated, testing the word. Then, before she could overthink it, I want this. You and Lily and this life you've built. I want to be part of it, even though it terrifies me, even though I'll probably make mistakes, even though I have no idea what I'm doing. That's real enough for me. He kissed her then, soft and careful, like he was giving her space to pull away if she needed to. But Victoria didn't pull away. She leaned in, letting herself fall into the moment without calculating outcomes or managing expectations. Just being present, just feeling, just allowing herself to want something for reasons that had nothing to do with empire or achievement. When they finally broke apart, Daniel was smiling. Well, that was worth waiting for. Was it terrifying for you too? Victoria asked. Absolutely. Still is. He laughed. But Lily would say that's okay. She says being brave doesn't mean you're not scared. It just means you do it anyway. Your daughter is very wise. She gets it from her mother. Daniel's expression softened with memory. Sarah used to say that love was just choosing someone every single day, even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard. I think she'd like you, actually. She always said I needed someone who'd call me on my bullshit. I'm excellent at that, Victoria said. Years of board meetings. They settled on the couch, careful not to disturb Lily, and talked until the sky outside darkened to deep purple. Daniel told her more about Sarah, the good memories and the hard ones, the way grief had reshaped him into someone both stronger and more fragile. Victoria told him about her father's death, about the relief she'd felt mixed with guilt, about the years she'd spent trying to earn approval from someone who couldn't give it. I think that's why I tested you, Victoria admitted, because it's what my father would have done, and some part of me was still trying to prove I was worthy of his legacy. And now? Now I'm trying to build my own legacy, one that doesn't require sacrificing humanity for success. She looked at Lily, peaceful in sleep. One that includes people like you and her, people who remind me what actually matters. Daniel squeezed her hand. For the record, you're worthy. Not because of what you've built or achieved, but because of who you're choosing to become. The words settled into Victoria's chest, warm and unexpected. She'd spent her entire life chasing worthiness through accomplishment, never realizing it couldn't be earned that way. It could only be claimed through the choice to be vulnerable, to connect, to care about things that couldn't be quantified on a balance sheet. She stayed until late, until Lily woke up disoriented and needed her father to carry her to bed. She helped clean up the tea party detritus, carefully packing away the butterfly wings for next time. And when she finally left, stepping out into the cool Queen's evening, she felt different, lighter. Like she'd put down a weight she'd been carrying so long, she'd forgotten what it felt like to stand up straight. The next few months unfolded like a slow revolution. The benefits package rolled out in phases, each implementation meeting resistance from some quarters and celebration from others. Victoria spent hours in focus groups, listening to employees share how the changes affected their lives. A housekeeping supervisor who could finally afford her diabetes medication. A line cook who took his first sick day in 3 years. A server who cried with relief when she learned about the childcare assistance. These stories became Victoria's North Star when the financial analysts questioned her decisions or industry publications called her naive. She'd built an empire on numbers, but she was learning to measure success in different ways, in reduced turnover rates and employee satisfaction scores, and the small ways people's lives improved. Daniel officially entered the development program in June. Victoria made sure she had no direct oversight of his progression. Appearances mattered, and she wouldn't give her critics ammunition, but she watched from a distance as he flourished, his natural understanding of hospitality combining with business education to create something special. His restaurant concept emerged over months of development, a neighborhood place that served fresh, affordable food with dignity and care. Not fine dining, not fast food, but something in between, the kind of restaurant where a single parent could bring their kid after a long shift and feel welcomed instead of judged, where the staff were paid living wages and treated as professionals, where the food was simple but excellent because excellence didn't require pretension. He presented the concept to Victoria's executive team in September, his nervousness showing only in the way his hands gripped the podium. Lily sat in the back row, legs swinging, wearing her best dress and gold butterfly wings because she'd insisted they were good luck. The presentation was masterful. Daniel had learned the business language, could talk about profit margins and operational efficiency. But he never lost sight of the human element, the way a good meal could be an act of care, the way restaurants could be community gathering places instead of just transaction points. When he finished, the room was silent. Then the head of operations started clapping, and others joined in. Victoria felt pride swell in her chest, almost painful in its intensity. The executive team approved the concept unanimously. Construction on the first location, a renovated space in Brooklyn, would begin in January. But success in business didn't mean the personal complications disappeared. If anything, they intensified. The media eventually caught on to Victoria and Daniel's relationship, though they tried to keep it quiet. The headlines were predictably salacious. Boss and employee romance sparks ethics questions. Victoria Hale's conflict of interest. Billionaire CEO dating former server raises eyebrows. The new board, carefully selected for their commitment to ethical leadership and employee welfare, called an emergency meeting to discuss the perception problem. Victoria faced them across the conference table, Daniel beside her, both of them prepared for battle. "Let me be clear," Victoria said before anyone else could speak. "Daniel Carter and I are in a relationship. We have been for several months. He has no reporting relationship to me. His progression through the development program is overseen entirely by the program director and reviewed by an independent committee. I have recused myself from any decisions involving his restaurant concept beyond the initial approval, which was unanimous." She pulled out documentation. "Everything is documented. Everything is above board. And if anyone thinks there's an impropriety, I invite you to investigate thoroughly." Eleanor Santos, now the board chair, studied the documents carefully. "The procedure seems sound, but Victoria, you have to understand how this looks." "I understand perfectly. It looks like a CEO is in a relationship with someone who used to work for her. But Daniel hasn't been my employee for months. He's an independent contractor in a development program. And even if he were still my employee, as long as there's no power dynamic or favoritism, what business is it of anyone's who I date?" "It's the board's business when it affects shareholder confidence," another board member interjected. "Does it?" Victoria challenged. "Our stock is up 18% since we implemented the benefits package. Employee satisfaction scores are at record highs. Turnover is down 42%. Customer reviews are overwhelmingly positive. Every metric that matters is moving in the right direction. So tell me, how exactly does my personal relationship affect shareholder confidence?" Daniel spoke up then, his voice steady. "If I may, I think what's really happening here is discomfort with the optics of a female CEO dating someone who earns less than her. If the genders were reversed, if Victoria were a male CEO dating a woman who used to work for him, we wouldn't be having this conversation." The room went silent. Someone coughed uncomfortably. Eleanor's lips curved into a slight smile. "He's not wrong. We've had 3 male executives marry their assistants over the years, and I don't recall anyone questioning it." "This is different," someone started. "Why?" Victoria interrupted. "Because I'm a woman? Because Daniel isn't wealthy? Because our relationship doesn't fit into neat boxes of how powerful people are supposed to behave?" She leaned forward. "I've spent my entire career fighting against double standards. I'm not going to apologize for being in a relationship with a good man who challenges me to be better." "Nobody's asking you to apologize," Eleanor said, "but we do need to ensure there are safeguards. Clear documentation, transparent processes. Not because we doubt your integrity, but because we have a responsibility to shareholders." "Agreed," Victoria said. "I welcome oversight. I welcome transparency. What I won't accept is being told that I have to choose between leading this company and having a personal life." The discussion continued for another hour, but the outcome was never really in doubt. Eleanor and the other new board members understood what the old guard hadn't, that Victoria's personal evolution was inseparable from the company's transformation. You couldn't ask someone to lead with humanity and then punish them for being human. As they left the boardroom, Daniel took Victoria's hand. "That was intense. Welcome to my world. Intense is standard. Do you ever get tired of fighting? Victoria considered this. Sometimes, but then I remember what I'm fighting for, and it gets easier. They walked through the tower, past employees who waved or smiled, past the restaurant where they'd first really seen each other. So much had changed in less than a year. So much was still changing. Victoria? Daniel stopped at the elevator bay. Thank you. For what? For fighting. For us. For choosing this even when it's complicated. He kissed her forehead gently. Sarah used to say that love was just choosing someone every day. I think she'd be glad I'm choosing you. Victoria felt tears prick her eyes. Happy tears, the kind she'd almost forgotten existed. I'm choosing you too, you and Lily, and this beautiful, messy, complicated life we're building together. The restaurant opened in March, on the first day of spring. Daniel had wanted to call it Sarah's Table to honor his late wife, but Lily had objected. Mommy would want it to be about new things, not sad things, she'd said with 6-year-old wisdom. So they compromised. The butterfly room, with a small plaque inside dedicating it to Sarah's memory. The opening night was invitation only, staff, family, investors, and a carefully curated list of food critics. Victoria arrived early, watching Daniel move through his kitchen with the confidence of someone finally doing what they were meant to do. The space was beautiful in its simplicity. Warm wood, soft lighting, an open kitchen where diners could watch their food being prepared with care. Lily was there too, of course, wearing a new dress and her ever-present butterfly wings serving as the unofficial greeter. She took her job very seriously, asking each guest their name and favorite butterfly species before showing them to their tables. Miss Eleanor, what kind of butterfly do you like? Eleanor Santos, dressed in elegant evening wear, crouched down to Lily's level. I've always been partial to monarchs. Very determined travelers. That's perfect. Daddy says you're very determined too. Lily led Eleanor to a prime table near the window. You get the best seat because monarchs are special. Victoria watched from the bar, her heart full. Her mother had come too, looking more relaxed than Victoria had seen her in years. Patricia had become a fixture in their lives over the past months, claiming grandparent privileges with Lily and offering Victoria the kind of maternal wisdom she'd been missing. You look happy, darling, Patricia said, joining her at the bar. I am happy. Is that strange? Not strange at all. Long overdue, actually. Patricia squeezed her hand. Your father would have hated all of this, you know. The benefits package, the relationship with Daniel, this whole transformation. I know. Good. That means you're doing it right. Patricia's smile was fierce. Build something better than what he left you. Build something worth inheriting. The dinner service was flawless. Each dish was simple but perfect. Seasonal ingredients treated with respect. Flavors that spoke of care rather than pretension. Victoria watched critics take notes, saw investors lean back with satisfied expressions, heard the comfortable hum of conversation that meant people were genuinely enjoying themselves. But the real test came at 10 p.m. when they opened the doors to walk-ins. A line had formed outside. Neighborhood families, young couples, elderly individuals who'd seen the affordable prices and decided to try something new. Daniel had insisted on keeping half the tables available for walk-ins, refusing to be exclusive even on opening night. Victoria watched him greet a family with 3 young children, saw him personally recommend dishes that would work for picky eaters, observed the way he made people feel welcomed rather than judged. This was what he'd been trying to explain that first night. Hospitality wasn't about luxury, it was about care. A little girl, about Lily's age, asked if they had chicken nuggets. Daniel smiled and said, "We have something even better, chicken, that's been loved." 20 minutes later, the girl was eating happily, her parents looking relieved to have found a place where their children could be children without disapproval. At midnight, after the last guests had left and the staff was cleaning up, Daniel found Victoria in the dining room. She was sitting alone at a table by the window, looking out at the Brooklyn street. "So?" he asked, sliding into the seat across from her. "Verdict?" "It's perfect, truly perfect." Victoria reached across the table for his hand. "You built something beautiful." "We built something beautiful," Daniel corrected. "You gave me the opportunity, the training, the funding, the confidence that this could work. But you created it, the vision, the execution, the heart of it, That's all you. Daniel was quiet for a moment, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. Sarah would have loved this place. She always said restaurants should feel like home, not performance spaces. She sounds like she was an incredible person. She was, and I think... Daniel paused, choosing his words carefully. I think she'd be glad I found you. Glad that Lily has you in her life. Glad that I'm learning how to be happy again. Victoria felt tears threatening. I hope I'm worthy of that. You are. Not because you're perfect, but because you keep trying to be better. That's all anyone can ask. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the city through the window. Somewhere in the kitchen, staff was laughing about something. Outside, a couple walked by hand in hand, life continuing in all its messy, beautiful complexity. Victoria, Daniel said softly. Yes? Move in with us. She looked up sharply. What? Move in with us. You practically live at our place anyway. Lily asks every night when you're coming back, and He took a breath. I want you there. Not visiting, not staying over. Living. Being part of our family. Daniel, I live in a penthouse in Manhattan. You live in a one-bedroom apartment in Queens. The logistics alone, so we find a new place, something bigger, or we make the apartment work, or you keep the penthouse and we figure out splitting time. I don't care about the logistics. He moved around the table, kneeling beside her chair. I care about waking up with you every morning, about making breakfast together while Lily demands pancakes, about coming home from this place and finding you there, about building a life, not just having a relationship. Victoria's heart was pounding. This was it, the moment where she could retreat into practicality and safety, or she could leap into the terrifying unknown of actual commitment. I snore, she blurted out. Daniel laughed. I know, you fell asleep on my couch last week. And I'm terrible in the mornings. I need at least 2 cups of coffee before I'm functional. I'm aware. I've learned to just put the coffee near you and back away slowly. And I work insane hours. Sometimes I'll need to be at the office at midnight or 5 a.m. or... Victoria? Daniel cupped her face gently. I'm not asking you to be perfect. I'm asking you to be present. To choose this life with us. To stop holding part of yourself back because you're afraid of getting it wrong. She closed her eyes, feeling tears slip down her cheeks. I'm terrified. I know, me too. He pressed his forehead against hers. But let's be terrified together. Isn't that better than being safe and alone? Victoria opened her eyes and saw everything she'd been afraid to want reflected in Daniel's face. Acceptance, patience, love without conditions. The kind of love that didn't require her to earn it, just to show up honestly and keep choosing it. Yes, she whispered. Yes to all of it. To moving in, to building a life together, to being terrified and doing it anyway. Daniel kissed her then, deep and sure, and Victoria felt something finally settle into place. She'd spent her entire life accumulating power, wealth, achievements, defenses, but this felt like the opposite of accumulation. This felt like coming home. When they finally broke apart, Victoria laughed through her tears. Lily is going to lose her mind. Oh, she already knows. I asked her permission first. You did? Of course, she's part of this decision. Daniel helped Victoria to her feet. She said, and I quote, Daddy, Miss Victoria has to live with us because she needs people to love her, and we're very good at that. Victoria pressed her hand to her mouth, overwhelmed. She said that? 6-year-old wisdom. Turns out it's the most reliable kind. They locked up the restaurant together, turning off lights and checking doors, the simple domestic ritual of closing down a space you care about. As they stepped out into the cool spring night, Victoria looked up at the sky. You could see actual stars from this part of Brooklyn. Not many, but enough. What are you thinking? Daniel asked, following her gaze. I'm thinking about my father, about how he built an empire but died alone. And I'm thinking about how I almost did the same thing. Victoria turned to face him. But I didn't, because you showed me a different way. You and Lily taught me that real strength isn't about testing people or maintaining distance or protecting yourself from feeling. It's about showing up, being vulnerable, choosing love even when it's terrifying. So what happens now? Victoria smiled. Now we go home. We tell Lily she gets a bigger room in the new apartment. We figure out the logistics. We probably mess some things up and fix them together. We build something that matters more than empire. Sounds perfect. They walked toward the subway, hand in hand, just two people among millions in the city that never slept. But Victoria wasn't alone anymore in those millions. She had Daniel and Lily and a life that was messy and complicated and more valuable than anything she'd accumulated in her climb to the top. She thought about that dinner on the 60th floor when she'd looked at Daniel Carter and seen someone to test. She couldn't have imagined then that he would become the person who tested her instead, tested her assumptions, her defenses, her entire understanding of what it meant to be strong. She'd failed that test spectacularly, and in failing, she'd finally learned how to succeed at what actually mattered. 6 months later, Victoria stood on the rooftop of Hale Tower, watching the sun set over Manhattan. The rooftop had been transformed over the spring and summer, the concrete wasteland replaced with a garden unlike anything the city had seen. There were trees in raised beds, winding paths made of reclaimed brick, benches positioned to catch the best light. And everywhere, there were butterflies. Real butterflies, attracted by carefully selected plants. Monarchs and swallowtails and painted ladies, dancing among flowers that bloomed in riots of color. It was chaotic and beautiful, and completely impractical from a business standpoint, which was exactly why Victoria had insisted on it. The garden had been Lily's idea, technically. Daddy's restaurant has butterflies inside, she'd reasoned. Your building should have real ones outside. So Victoria had hired landscape architects and entomologists and turned the entire rooftop into a butterfly sanctuary accessible to all employees and their families. It cost a fortune. The board had objected. Victoria had done it anyway. Now, on this perfect September evening, the garden was filled with people, employees and their children, neighborhood families invited for the grand opening, donors to the Urban Wildlife Fund the garden supported. Lily was giving tours, her knowledge of butterfly species embarrassingly comprehensive, her enthusiasm infectious. Daniel found Victoria standing near the edge, watching the city lights begin to flicker on. "Penny for your thoughts?" She leaned into him, comfortable with the casual intimacy they'd developed over months of living together, of navigating the beautiful mess of blended lives. "I'm thinking about my father, about how he used to stand in his office and look down at the city like he owned it. And now? Now I'm standing up here looking at butterflies with a 6-year-old who thinks I'm magic because I know the CEO. Victoria smiled. "I think I prefer this perspective." "Miss Victoria! Miss Victoria!" Lily came running up, her face flushed with excitement. "Come see! There's a monarch on the milkweed and she might be laying eggs." Victoria let herself be pulled away by a small hand, Daniel following behind, and she thought about transformation, about how butterflies started as caterpillars, completely dissolved inside their chrysalises, and emerged as something entirely different. How that process looked like destruction from the outside, but was actually the most profound kind of creation. She'd dissolved her old self over the past year, the cold CEO who tested people, who kept distance, who measured worth in power and achievement. And what had emerged was this: a woman who could be moved to tears by a child's drawing, who fought for benefits packages with the same ferocity she'd once fought for market dominance, who was learning that real strength meant showing up honestly even when it was terrifying. The woman who could stand on a rooftop garden surrounded by butterflies and employees and the family she'd chosen, and feel nothing but gratitude for the test that had broken her open. Later that night, after the guests had left and the garden was quiet except for the rustle of leaves, Victoria and Daniel sat on a bench with Lily asleep between them, her head on Victoria's lap. "She's getting heavy," Daniel observed. "I don't mind." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars emerge above the city lights. Margaret had stayed late helping with the event, and she approached them now with a tablet. "Sorry to interrupt, but the quarterly numbers are in." "Tupas." Victoria took the tablet, scanning the report. Revenue was up 22%. Employee satisfaction scores had hit 93%. Turnover was down to 18%, almost unheard of in the hospitality industry. Customer loyalty metrics were through the roof. "We're not just succeeding," Margaret said. "We're setting new industry standards. 3 major hospitality companies have announced similar benefits packages in the last month, citing us as inspiration." Victoria handed back the tablet. My father used to say that the only thing that mattered was winning, that sentiment was weakness, that people were assets to be managed. And what do you say? Margaret asked. Victoria looked down at Lily, sleeping peacefully, then at Daniel, who was watching her with those warm brown eyes that had seen through every defense she'd ever built. She thought about the employees who could finally afford their medications, the parents who could take sick days without fear, the workers who felt valued instead of expendable. I say he was wrong about everything that mattered, that strength isn't about distance or testing or protection, it's about showing up for people, about building something that serves humanity instead of just accumulating power. She smiled. And I say that winning means something different than I thought. It's not about the empire you build. It's about who's standing beside you when you look at what you've created. Margaret nodded, satisfied. That's a good answer. The board will like it. I don't actually care if the board likes it, Victoria said honestly. I care that it's true. After Margaret left, Daniel shifted Lily carefully and put his arm around Victoria. You've come a long way from the woman who fired me as a test. That woman was lonely and didn't even know it, surrounded by empire, completely alone. Victoria leaned her head on his shoulder. Thank you for seeing through her, for calling her cruelty by its name, for refusing to participate in perpetuating it. Thank you for listening, for changing, for choosing us. He kissed her temple, for being brave enough to fail that test. They carried Lily home together, to the apartment they'd found in Brooklyn, bigger than Daniel's old place, but still modest by Victoria's previous standards. It had 3 bedrooms, a kitchen where they could cook together, and enough space for Lily's art supplies and butterfly collections to spread comfortably. Victoria had kept the penthouse for now, using it occasionally for very early meetings or very late nights. But home was here. Home was wherever Daniel and Lily were. As Victoria tucked Lily into bed, the little girl stirred and opened her eyes. Did the monarchs lay eggs? She asked sleepily. We'll check tomorrow, Victoria promised. Okay. Night, Mommy Victoria. The word hit Victoria like a physical force. Lily had been using it for a few weeks now, this hybrid name that acknowledged both Victoria's role in her life and the memory of the mother she'd lost. Daniel had explained it was Lily's way of making room for both loves without feeling like she was betraying either. Good night, sweetheart, Victoria whispered, kissing her forehead. She found Daniel in their bedroom, already changed for bed. He looked up as she entered. You okay? You look emotional. She called me Mommy Victoria. I heard. Daniel pulled her into his arms. Is that okay? It's everything. Victoria pressed her face into his shoulder, letting the tears come. I never thought I'd have this. A family, people who choose to love me not because of what I can give them, but just because I show up. Well, you better keep showing up because we're not letting you go. They fell into bed together, exhausted from the long day, but content in a way Victoria had never experienced before. As she drifted off to sleep, surrounded by the soft sounds of her family, Daniel's steady breathing, the distant rustle of Lily rolling over in the next room, Victoria thought about journeys. She'd started this year standing in a tower looking down at a city she thought she understood. Wielding power she thought made her strong. She'd tested a man to reveal his character and instead revealed her own emptiness. And now she was here, in a Brooklyn apartment with mismatched furniture and children's drawings on the walls, more powerful than she'd ever been, not because of what she controlled, but because of what she'd let herself love. On the nightstand, her phone buzzed one last time, a message from Eleanor Santos. Board voted unanimously to name the rooftop garden the Sarah Carter Memorial Butterfly Sanctuary. Lily's suggestion seemed appropriate. Victoria smiled in the darkness and texted back, "Perfect." Then she set down the phone, turned to Daniel, and let herself fall into sleep surrounded by love. No empire required, no tests needed, just this, the messy, beautiful, terrifying choice to show up for people and let them show up for you. Real strength, she'd finally learned, wasn't proven by testing others. It was proven by standing beside them when it cost you everything and discovering that what you gained was worth infinitely more than what you'd risked. The butterflies on the rooftop would emerge each spring, transform each summer, migrate each fall. The cycle continuing, beautiful in its impermanence, perfect in its constant change, just like love, just like family, just like the woman Victoria Hale was still becoming, One honest choice, one vulnerable moment, one act of courage at a time. And that, she thought as she drifted off to sleep in Daniel's arms, was the only empire worth building. One made of moments instead of monuments, of connection instead of control, of love instead of fear. The kind of empire that lived in butterfly wings and children's laughter, and the simple choice to keep showing up, day after day, for the people who mattered most. The kind her father never knew existed. The kind she'd spend the rest of her life building, one beautiful, terrifying, absolutely perfect day at a time.